we'll see. If there is, you'll have your notes and stuff like that. So there might be, but it'll be based on the outline. Okay, I think we're live. We are live. Let's look. Oh, I should have sent you guys the handout. Let me see. Can I go away from this? I guess I can go away from this. 1 second. I think I can. And I think it's still. No, I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go there. Let me see. Class tonight. Okay, 1 second. There we go. Okay, I just emailed you both the course pack that's got the handout in it. Okay. Detailed handout, starting on page 11. Let's talk. Now, I got to start by making a confession that I've never been a huge fan of Beowulf. One of the reasons is it's always in the shadow of Homer, right? But there's a bigger reason, okay? I'm an English professor, and although not all English professors are like that, I am certainly one of those English professors that what I really love is the great conversation. I love, looking at the links, obviously from Homer to Virgil to Dante to Milton, but everywhere in between. It's getting that dialogue, looking at all the allusions, looking at how it's one big poem, right, that's being written by all the authors across time, right? Now, because that's one of the things I love to focus on when I teach literature or when I read literature on my own, Beowulf, well, what's wrong with Beowulf if you love that, You know what happened to Beowulf for a long time? It was lost, okay? I mean, even Chaucer didn't know Beowulf, okay? That's how long it's been lost, right? So Beowulf exerts no influence on any of them. Chaucer, Spenser, Shakespeare, Milton, Pope, there's Martha, Wordsworth, Coleridge, all of them. Shelley, Keats, Tennyson, Browning, all the way on up until the 20th century when it was found again. Right? So it's not part of the dialogue. And so that was one of the things that always made me a little less interested. But the great thing is that even if Beowulf didn't influence anything for 1,200 years, okay, it did have a real huge impact on The Lord of the Rings, which is the great epic of the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned. It is the epic of the 20th century. And other than the Bible, Beowulf might be the single most important influence on Lord of the Rings. Other than the Bible, there's all sorts of things. And again, remember, there's all sorts of other Norse things, right? There's the Nibelungenlied. There is the Volsung saga. There is the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, okay? There's all of these different, Norse myths that had a big influence on Lewis and Tolkien. And you might remember when we did the biography that Lewis and Tolkien were part of a group called the Coelbitars or the Coelbiters, where they sat together and read through all the Norse sagas until they were finished. Right? So, but Beowulf more than anything. And remember, Beowulf, even though it doesn't, I don't know if you notice this, but Beowulf does not take place in England. Do you understand where it's taking place? It's good. It's taking place in Denmark. So Hrothgar is a Dane, and then the Geats are from today southern Sweden. So it never even goes to England. Okay, it's taking place in Denmark and a little bit in southern Sweden, but it's still written by a British poet, an Anglo-Saxon poet, but gathering these tales from the whole sort of Norse world. And remember that Tolkien loved all those languages, not just Anglo-Saxon, which is also known as Old English. But he knew Norse, he knew Finnish, he knew Goth. There were a lot of other different languages up there that Tolkien, knew actually. Right? And so he was so influenced by this book. And as I'll say in a moment, he actually wrote almost everybody considers it the first great essay on Beowulf, and he published it in 1936. And the reason it's considered great, it's called The Monsters and the Critics. Isn't that a wonderful title? And you can find it. In fact, I don't know if anybody has it, but apparently if you get the bigger Norton edition of this, it includes most of that essay in the back. This one doesn't. But I think what's called the Norton Critical Edition, I don't own a copy of that. It's a little bit harder to find that. It might even be online by now, because it should be out of copyright by now. Have you found it? It is online. Okay, good. And it's fascinating to read. Now, what was unique about it? Of course, Tolkien talked about linguistics and other things. That was his specialty. But until Tolkien wrote that essay, The Monsters and the Critics, most other critics treated Beowulf like an artifact. Right? They didn't really treat it as a poem. I mean, they translated, they did this, they did that, but they studied it like it was an artifact rather than a great work of literature. An epic that can be read and studied just for the beauty of its literary quality. That seems kind of weird to us today, but a lot of times classicists, they get very, very narrowly focused. This was really driven home to me way back when I was in grad school 30 years ago. I was living in a graduate dorm, and I was friends with one girl who was getting a classics major. In other words, she was studying Greek, ancient Greek. And she had spent the entire semester translating the Agamemnon, one of the greatest works ever written. You were in that class, Paula. Marcy was in that class too. When we went over the Oresteia, Agamemnon, libation bearers, and Eumenides. And she had spent the whole thing translating the Agamemnon, which is some of the most difficult Greek, apparently, to translate. And I said to her, wow, what did you learn about the Agamemnon? Well, what insight did you get into it? And she had nothing to say at all. Now, I guess I can understand that, because if a student of mine, like a former student, gives me a story they wrote, and they asked me to proofread it, right? And I proofread it, and then afterwards they ask me, what did you think about it? I'll say, well, I don't really have much to think about, because when you're proofreading, you're focusing so much on word by word that you sometimes don't get a sense of the whole, right? And I think that's what happens sometimes with classicists. They get so focused on the narrow thing. And, thank God we have good classicists to give us translations so we can talk about it, right? But, again, most of them, and here's the funny thing, too, the poetry is so powerful that it really seems like history. And there's probably some legendary background to it. But it's so powerful, it seems like a chronicle. But no, it's still a work of fiction, right? I don't think there was a Grendel around there. Although I would argue Grendel was the first serial killer. Grendel's the first Hannibal the cannibal, because he doesn't just kill, he delights in killing, as we'll talk about in a moment. But again, that's the thing that Tolkien brought to it. A love of the genre of, well, it's kind of weird to call it a fairy tale, right? Because we don't usually think of fairy tales being that horrific. I mean, the Brothers Grimm can get pretty scary. But I mean, ultimately, it is somewhere between a fairy tale and an epic, right? And I always like to make efficient use of my space. So at the end of the 4-page handout, I've actually got a few quotes from Tolkien's famous essay on fairy stories that we'll talk about if we have a chance. But I want to focus here on Beowulf and what Tolkien did. And again, think about it. Tolkien writes The Lord of the Rings layered with languages that he's invented. What could be more nerdy than that? Oh my gosh, right? And yet, despite the fact that The Lord of the Rings has so many details, it's like it's written by an engineer or something, it also is a great work of literature with unbelievable insight into character and to theme and to all the things that we struggle with and whatnot. I mean, so Tolkien is the perfect person to write The Monsters and the Critics and get us into it, right? Now, number two, another thing now Tolkien wasn't the first person to ever say this, but he really explained it well and argues for it well. And it's actually pretty obvious when you go back and look at it, right? Beowulf is clearly written by a Christian, and almost surely by a Christian monk, right? But he's writing it in a pre-Christian mode. Now, we'll see examples where he's always kind of poking himself in there and commenting on the action, right? But he doesn't make Beowulf into a Christian hero. He allows him to be a pagan hero, a noble pagan, a virtuous pagan, but still a pagan hero. He doesn't force that upon him. there's often commentary about, oh, these poor people, they don't know the greater truth. But he never talks down to his characters. He always treats them. You know what? I'm going to shut that just because I could roll that pizza up for me. Crazy. I've been avoiding the whole. Oh my God! Oh, the books are in here. Oh, the books. That's always the joke about a lady's purse. What have you got here? Bricks? You got any purse like that? Yeah, that's always been a joke, but I don't know.
You see the 101 Dalmatians?
Oh.
One?
Oh, okay.
She actually has bricks in her.
Yeah, she does have bricks. That's right. Yeah, that's so. I don't know, but it's like amazing. That's why you got the books. What is in here? Oh my gosh! Man, they with that they'd even charge you money at what's that called? Southwest. You go over 50 pounds or something, they charge you for it. But anyway, so we'll see examples where we've got a layering. Oh, let me go back to the camera, and I think it's catching me. Hopefully it is. Okay. That we have a layering here. See, what's amazing about Norse mythology is that all of the Norse mythology we have was actually written by Christians. We have yet to find something like the Iliad or the Odyssey or Ovid's Metamorphoses or Hesiod or Greek tragedies that are written by, pre-Christian pagans. Now, they're collecting these stories, and they seem to be very faithful to them. But all of the Norse mythology we have is seen through a filter. But at least Beowulf, to me, it's clear that this Christian writer has been willing to allow an integrity to Beowulf and Hrothgar and all the different characters in there and not try to make them Christian. And, my guess, just from the analogy of Greek and Roman literature, where you can see all of these links, like foreshadowings, they were probably there in the Norse mythology as well. He just draws them out. Now, this is important because the Lord of the Rings is very much in the tradition of Beowulf, because the Lord of the Rings is an epic written by a Christian writer, but set in a pre-Christian world. Right? And, as we've said a couple times, not only is it pre-Christian, it's pre-Jewish. Because Middle-earth is Earth, but a long, long time ago, even before God revealed himself to Abraham. In fact, I can't say for sure if Tolkien had this in mind, but Tolkien did say in one of his letters that we are living at the end of the 5th age. He said that in one of his letters. And generally speaking, ages are about 3,000 years. The first and second age are, 3,500, but they're about 3,000 years, okay? And, it's certainly the third and second, or the first is hard to tell because it's so long. But if you think about it, if the 4th and 5th age are 3,000 years each, and we're living at the end of the 5th age, then the Lord of the Rings is taking place about 6,000 years ago. And you probably know that traditionally there was this guy named Bishop Ussher who tried to figure out the genealogies of all those people, and he theorized that creation was 4004 BC. Right? Now, it's probably longer than that because it's very obvious in the Bible that oftentimes those genealogies are representative. In other words, they're not necessarily every single person. And the fact that they're broken into 10, 10, and 10 tells you they're trying to get a perfect number. So, now still though, the Bible would suggest, maybe 10,000 BC, not around a long time. But anyway, Tolkien would have known that date of 4004 BC. And so, it's just kind of cool. It's almost like this is the stuff before the Bible or whatever. But in any case, he does not, it's there, as we've seen so often, that Judeo-Christian framework undergirds everything, but he doesn't force it upon his characters. In Aragorn, we see all sorts of virtues that are going to point forward, just like Aeneas embodies so many virtues that point forward to Christianity. Because Aeneas, for instance, he's courageous and all, but he has something that Achilles and Odysseus don't have, and that's patience and faith and long suffering, which you need if you're living in the Aeneid Or if you're living in the world of the Bible, you need a whole lot of patience, right? Because it takes time, right? It's a slow process. Remember, the Jews in slavery for 400 years before they came out to get the promised land. And even then, they spent 40 years in the wilderness, right? So, again, Tolkien is learning from Beowulf how to do that. He also learned it from another book that some of you have read. Have any of you read in a class, Boethius, Consolation of Philosophy? Does that come up in anybody's class? Okay, you read it in the class? Okay. That was written about 500 AD, he's like a couple generations after Augustine, not too much longer. And Boethius, okay, was a Christian writer. In fact, he seems to have died as a martyr because he was resisting the king, who was what's called an Arian, who didn't believe that Jesus was God, just man. And Boethius wrote some books that are specifically Christian, but this book called Consolation of Philosophy, it's worth reading. It's a weird book. And in it, he's in prison, and Boethius was in fact in prison, and he's in despair, and Lady Philosophy comes to him and tries to console him. In other words, what consolation can we get out of philosophy for dealing with mortality and despair and injustice and all of these things? And all sorts of things happen. It's really wonderful. But what's unique about Consolation of Philosophy, and both Lewis and Tolkien wrote about this, is that Boethius, although he was a Christian, he decided that for this book, he was going to write it in a pre-Christian mode. He was going to come up with all the consolation we can find, how we grow in virtue, how we develop, all that sort of stuff. But when he wrote it, he confined himself to the wisdom of the Greeks and Romans. So there's a lot in there from Plato and Aristotle. There are references to, Homer and Virgil. There's references, of course, to Cicero, right? The Stoics, the Epicureans even. There are references to that, but he very carefully doesn't bring in specifically Christianity. Another way of putting this, he bases his work on what we, human beings, what we can learn from general revelation, the way God speaks to all people, through creation, through our conscience, through our reason, through our imagination. He limits himself to that. But, of course, a lot of it seems to point forward, right, allegorically towards greater truths. And Tolkien and Lewis both were big fans of Boethius, right? Now, I mentioned those three. Some of you, have any of you ever read a book called Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis? Okay? Till We Have Faces is Lewis's version of a Boethius or Beowulf or Lord of the Rings, because it takes place BC, and the characters are pagan characters, but everything that happens in that book is pointing forward towards a greater revelation to come. So it's neat to read that book. Another one, I didn't put everything there. Another work that would fit for that is actually King Lear. Now, nobody knows what Shakespeare actually believed, okay, because he loses himself in his characters. But he's certainly writing out of a Christian ethic, okay? But in King Lear, it's set in a sort of pagan pre-Christian England, right? And it's weird. If you ever read, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. Same thing could be said about the business office at HBU. Kill us for their sport, right? And so King Lear is like that. Another one that would fit is Milton wrote a late in life wrote a play called Samson Agonistes, and it's about the story of Samson and Delilah, and it's all set, of course, in the Old Testament, and there isn't a single reference to Christ himself, but everything points ahead towards a greater Christian meaning. Right? So there's a number of works like this that have done this, and it allows you to explore. And there seems to have been a sort of genre in the Middle Ages, Lewis talks about. He wrote a book called Discarded Image, that in the Middle Ages, that would be a discipline, right? Let's see what you can write only based on, let's say, Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero. How much truth can you arrive at? Right? So what I'm saying is, Beowulf is not just a model to Tolkien for a Norse kind of epic, right? Because Lord of the Rings is much more Norse than it is Greco-Roman. Okay, I mean, there are references and stuff like that, but it is primarily, and we'll go over this, a much more Norse mythology kind of book than a Greek and Roman mythology kind of book, right? So Beowulf gives them a lot of stuff that we'll see, but as important as all the specific details, Beowulf is a model for a sort of experiment. Can we confine ourselves to general revelation and yet still have a kind of foreshadowing of greater knowledge to come? Which is just, it's neat. It's just a neat enterprise. More people should try to do this, I think. That would be kind of cool, right? I mean, I suppose in a way the Chronicles of Narnia don't really ever mention Christ, except once, there I go by a different name. But other than that, it doesn't really reference it, and yet it's underlying all of it, right? So it's a wild stuff. Look at number 2 in the handout. These are some quotes from Monsters and the Critics. All right, he says, the hero, Beowulf, writes Tolkien, Beowulf, quote, moves in a northern heroic age imagined by a Christian, and therefore has a noble and gentle quality, though conceived to be a pagan. You understand? That Beowulf is a pagan, and does Beowulf have any hope of going to heaven in the Christian sense? No. What consolation does Beowulf get that is in keeping with his society? What is the greatest reward Beowulf can get? How does this book end? This epic end? What does he get? He dies, but he gets gold. Explain it. He gets a what? What does the Viking want? You die. Now, there's not much mention of Valhalla, the mead hall in the sky, but Beowulf begins by describing one of these and ends by describing Beowulf's. Oh, good. He passes down to Wiglaf, right? Passes down the thing, and he gets, maybe this is too easy to pull it out. He gets a really big, beautiful what? Funeral, okay? And then they sound silly, but I mean, this is there another epic that ends with a funeral? And thus they buried Hector, thank you, breaker of horses, okay? The Iliad ends with a funeral, right? And actually, if you read all of the Odyssey carefully, generally, we end the Odyssey when Odysseus is reunited with Penelope, and I always end up running out of time by then anyway, when I'm teaching it. But the real ending of the Iliad has this incredible scene where we go back into the underworld again. And what happens is okay, we go back into the underworld because the suitors that Odysseus has killed are going into the underworld, right? And they go down there, right? And when they go down there, Agamemnon describes to Achilles his funeral, right? And Achilles it's not mentioned in the Iliad because of course he doesn't die at the end of the Iliad. But there's a description of Achilles' super great funeral, right? And in the end, what has he done? His bones are put together with Patroclus, his best friend, right? Then the suitors talk about how Odysseus got his revenge and killed him, right? And what happens is poor Agamemnon gets nothing. He neither gets to go home and be reunited with his wife like Odysseus, nor does he get a noble, killed on the battlefield and a noble funeral like Achilles. He comes home and is killed by his wife. Okay? So he gets stuck in between there. So in other words, what I'm saying is that really the Odyssey ends with a description of the noble funeral of Achilles, even as the Iliad ends with the description of the funeral of Hector. And here, and I'm not saying necessarily that the writer is mentioning Homer, it's just this is what you get. In a pagan world, if you only have a very shadowy sense of the afterlife, the great thing is to have a funeral and a funeral mound that people can see from miles away, with gold and everything, right? Think of the Egyptians. Now, of course, a lot of the Egyptians did hope they would continue on, but still, it's like I'm leaving behind this. It's wonderful. They're leaving behind a pyramid, and inside the pyramid is all this gold, but nobody gets to see it. It's kind of funny. Anyway. What's that? Well, we do. We broke in, you're right. Is that really what you want to be? Lara Croft, Tomb Raider?
No, I'm thinking more like Bill Weasley. Be a curse breaker and break into all the tombs in Egypt.
Oh, okay. You're talking about the TV show. Wait a minute. Who did you say? Bo Weasley?
Bill Weasley, Harry Potter.
Oh, okay. Did they break? I don't know. You know
He's a
that.
curse breaker. He breaks into stuff.
Oh.
He steals stuff from the bank.
Okay, that's probably not in the movies. Is that only in the books? Okay, I read that book. Well, that's interesting to know. Though. Okay, they're good. They're better. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. But again, in other words, we don't give him a consolation that his society doesn't know about. He gets the biggest consolation he can get within his society, and that is that great, and then be burned, right? And most of us are familiar with it from movies, where sometimes the Viking is put in a ship, and they send the ship out, and then what do? You've seen it, right? They shoot the bow and arrow on fire, and whoosh, right, and they all burn up, right? And that's, we see people, die in a funeral pyre. That's going to happen to what's his name, Theoden, as to his son, right? And you're going to get the.
What?
Well,
No, Denethor.
No, Denethor. But I'm trying to remember. Does it say? No, I'm trying to remember. Does it say that the bodies of the Rohirrim are going to be burned? No, I'm trying to think about that.
They're all buried.
I guess they are.
They're all mounds.
No, I guess they are buried because they take his son under there. That's true. They do take his son under there, which is odd because a lot of societies they would burn them. Right? Actually, the funny thing about the Iliad when they burned them at the end, that's a mistake that Homer made because actually we now know in the time of Achilles and Agamemnon they put them in huge tombs just like the Egyptians. It was during the time that Homer was writing that they burned them. Right, so that's actually a little error there that we've learned from archaeology. But anyway, I forgot another one that I mentioned there. Another one that is written by a Christian, but in a pre-Christian mode. Has anybody ever read The Knight's Tale? It's part of Canterbury Tales. Like if you read Canterbury Tales, Chaucer, you have the long introduction, and then the first tale that's told is The Knight's Tale, which is the longest one. And it tells a story. He didn't even make it up. It's told. No. That same story is retold by Shakespeare. I was going to say, but he still didn't make up the story anyway. Almost none of the stories does Chaucer make up. He just tells them better. But anyway, that long story that takes place at the same time as Theseus, so it takes place in the ancient world. Again, all of it points forward towards Christianity, but Christianity is never mentioned. Right? And Chaucer, unlike Shakespeare, we feel pretty confident that Chaucer was a believer because he talks about it himself in his own voice. Shakespeare, nobody knows what he believed. But Chaucer was clearly a believing Christian from what we have of him. But anyway, okay, so look at another quote here. So again, he has a noble and gentle quality, though conceived to be a pagan. So maybe our Christian writer is softening Beowulf a little bit. So maybe he's a little bit more gentlemanly, but he still is essentially pagan at heart. And he does boast quite a bit. And in some ways, you could say his pride does him in with the dragon. I mean, he didn't really have to take the dragon on one on one. And remember, he's like 70 years old by then. It's 50 years later, at least 70, maybe 80 years old. So you could say that a little bit of his pride does him in at the end, right? But it's also who he is. He is always the fighter, right? He's always just like Oedipus always is the riddle solver, even if it destroys him, right? Another thing, okay, now Hrothgar, I would argue that Hrothgar reminds me a lot of a biblical patriarch. Who are the patriarchs in the Old Testament? Good, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, we call them the patriarchs. And he's like that, right? I mean, when you read Hrothgar, he seems to be closer to understanding monotheism than Beowulf is. So let's say he's got that sense of it, right? Notice again, Beowulf's fully pagan hero. And then here's another quote at the end of paragraph 2. His funeral is not Christian, and his reward is the recognized virtue of his kingship and the hopeless sorrow of his people. Right? The author presents his hero, quote, as living in a noble but heathen past. And it's so important that Tolkien is explaining this to us, because he does the same thing in his book. Right? They are still, Theoden is still very much a pagan king. And Theoden and Denethor are somewhat close to Hrothgar in some ways, except Denethor goes nuts. Go ahead.
I realized something, pagan, pagan burning people. I just thought of Denethor, Gandalf's horizon, like burning. Like,
That's right, like the heathen kings of old. He does say that, doesn't he? Yeah. So there is already a sense of let's get a little better than this. Let's move on beyond this, which is sort of odd. And it's hard to say. Like I said, the author of Beowulf shows a great deal of restraint, but he still may tinker with things. We just don't know. And that would be such an amazing find if we could find something by them, something from whatever, 300 BC, that's directly, and then we can line it up, and it would be fascinating to be able to do that. But that's one of your jobs. Go out there and do some archaeology, man. Find it. Anyway, written, I don't know, on vellum maybe or something like that. Okay, let's jump down now to number 4. Okay? You've seen me write this on the board so often, that word, elegiac. That's very much the mood of Beowulf. Just the mood and feel, the ambiance of Lord of the Rings is very similar to Beowulf. And I mentioned later in there somewhere, I'll kind of jump around. But one of the things, the first time I started reading, I read something called the Nibelungenlied, which is written in prose. Have you read that one, Claire? You might enjoy it. The Nibelungenlied. It's the same story as Wagner's Ring Cycle, basically. Have you read that one? Yeah, that's kind of fun. And I started realizing that in Norse kind of mythology, they do something they don't do in Greek and Roman mythology generally. And it's what's often called a flash forward. And what that means is, here they are in the mead hall, right? And they are, excited. They do not know that soon it will be burning. This happens a lot in Norse mythology. It's so dark and fatalistic and Teutonic, right? This sense that gloom is coming. Right? Just a good example of that. Have any of you in any of your classes read Henry V? Shakespeare's Henry V? That didn't come in any classes? Or if you've seen it, it's really weird because at the end of the play, he defeats the French, the Battle of Agincourt. He courts and wins over the princess, and they're going to get married. It's all beautiful. And then the chorus, the guy who's the chorus, comes in and says, of course, a little bit later, he will die, and then everything will fall apart, and they'll lose everything they gained in France. It's like, what a bummer! Is that the way you're ending this? But that's exactly the way this book ends. This book should end with the funeral, and then it goes on for a couple pages talking about how, and then everything fell apart, and everybody fell upon them, and they all died. It's like, thank you. There's even an image of this lady wailing and yelling and screaming and dark prophecies. Oh my gosh! It's so, we still use that word, Teutonic, for dark and fatalistic and you can't escape. Okay, does anybody know the big difference between Greco-Roman mythology and Norse mythology, okay? Who are some of the heroes in Greek and Roman mythology? Okay, they're often the demigods, right? And even though they're called demigods, they're still what? If you're a demigod, you're still going to be mortal, right? You're still going to die, right? We have a few stories of the gods doing things, okay? But the real epic stories are always about the mortals. Even if they've got a divine mother or father, they still are mortal, right? Achilles and Odysseus, all of them. Theseus, Hercules, even Hercules turns out to be mortal. Theseus, Hercules, Jason, who am I forgetting? Perseus, thank you, Perseus. They're all like that. But if you read Norse mythology, they're almost always about the gods, right? They're about Thor is the one people know the most, right? But they're generally about the gods. But what is going to happen to the gods eventually? Ragnarok, they're all going to die, right? We've seen that movie, right? Thor, Ragnarok. Do you know what that means? It's kind of it means basically the twilight of the gods. You know how to say twilight of the gods in German? Such a cool word. It's the name of the last opera in the Ring Cycle. Remember, it starts with a G. I think, haven't got a clue, is that what you said?
No, I need a better clue.
Oh, okay. I thought, because that sounded like a German word. Haven't got a clue. Let's put it all together at once. Called Götterdämmerung. I may be spelling it wrong, but that's the name of the last play in Wagner's Ring Cycle. Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, okay? And you know who saw himself as enacting the twilight of the gods when he went into a bunker and then killed himself and his wife? It's Hitler. They use that example, right? Hitler, his wife, and also, what's his name, Goebbels, his propaganda minister, with his wife and family, and they all went into the bunker, and they all committed suicide. And they were very conscious of, and to make it, they failed, but they had explosives all over. They were going to blow up Berlin and take it all down with them. They really took their Wagner very seriously. In fact, this will terrify you, but this is actually true. In the bunker, what Goebbels and his wife did is one by one, they killed all of their children while they were sleeping. Then he killed her, and then he killed himself. I mean, they literally had these suicide pacts. It was just terrifying. There's an excellent movie called The Bunker. It was a TV movie with Anthony Hopkins playing Hitler. About the same year that he played St. Paul in Peter and Paul. He likes to do that. Just like he played C.S. Lewis, and about the same time he played Hannibal. So it's just anyway, amazing. And I've got to see The Father. Have anybody seen the new movie? Is it good? It's up for the Oscar. I've got to see it. Anyway, but again, the Twilight, and they're all going to die. Okay, now I don't know if you understand this, and it's interesting because this is part of Norse mythology, but it's one of the things that's unique about Lord of the Rings, and especially about the Silmarillion, more than the Lord of the Rings, because the Silmarillion is even more Norse. Right? Okay, the gods know that they're going to die, right? That it's coming, Ragnarok, that the end is going to come, and you know what is the name? Loki will come out, and then there's this horrific wolf that's going to come out. What's his name? Fenris Wolf. Lewis names that. It's going to come out. There's also a giant serpent that kind of goes around the tree, and all of this stuff is going to come out. And also Hel. You all know who that is now because it was Kate Blanchett. Yeah, was it Kate Blanchett? Yeah, with the horns and stuff. That Hel, that's the daughter of Loki, right? But anyway, the gods know they're going to die. So, do you know who the gods recruit to help them?
Hulk.
That's a good one. I like that. Right? They recruit mortals. They recruit mortals to help them. And that's when the mortals sometimes come in. And those mortals that die fighting nobly, where do they go? They're the ones that go to, did you say it? Valhalla. Good, Valhalla. That's, again, literally the mead hall in the sky. And do you know who carries those mortal heroes to Valhalla? This is their original job. You've all heard this name for these ladies. You say? You said the Valkyries. Okay? The Valkyries are there to take them up. Okay? And of course, the most famous Valkyrie, coming in there, right? Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit. That's the kind of opera I like, man. It's good stuff. And but again, the reason I mention that is think about the Silmarillion. The real people fighting in the Silmarillion are mostly the elves, and that in the Silmarillion itself is mostly. But they have recruited the noblemen, the Edain, who will become the Dunedain. Right? They've gotten them in there, and they fight too. And of course, they die much more quickly than the elves do. Right? But this is just a unique aspect, and it's just so dark and fatalistic. I mean, there's just not hope. I mean, terrible things happen in Greek and Roman mythology, but sometimes there's a little bit more hope. Okay? But here, the gods are going to die, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, but they're all going to destroy. What did Thor decide at the end? That Valhalla is wherever we build it? What does that end mean?
Yeah.
Is that what they basically decide?
Yeah.
Asgard. Thank you, Asgard. That's right. Asgard we'll rebuild it wherever we are, right? I don't know if that's exactly true to Norse mythology. I don't think. Yeah, I don't remember reading that part, but that's what they did for the movie. It's pretty good.
Ragnarok happened in the movies, so technically in the mythologies they would all be dead.
Oh, that's true. That's it. So we get to figure it out what to do later. And well, we all know what happens after Ragnarok. That's when Thor gets a beer belly, right? You see the last movie? It's huge. What's it all about? That was insane. Okay, anyway, I'm having fun. By the way, since this is a good literary class, if you have PBS at home, they've just released, Ken Burns just did a new 3-part documentary about Ernest Hemingway. And if you're a Hemingway fan, it's excellent. I watched the first 2, and I think tonight the 3rd one's coming out. It's 3 2-hour. And that guy, Ken Burns, he's always very serious. It's mostly talking heads and still photos, but they're really good. And if you're interested in Ernest Hemingway, man, what a life. I learned a lot of things I didn't know. Very interesting fellow, Hemingway. Okay. What's that? Oh, wait, hotel where? Oh, in Key West? In Cuba? You were in Cuba? Oh, okay. Oh, maybe, yeah. That's right, he was in Cuba. They talked about that. I've been to Key West, his house in Key West, which is really neat. And I got pretty close to Petoskey, Michigan, where I think his fourth wedding was up there. That guy got around, I tell you. But Key West is a cool place. It's a cool place. Right? And you know what it all started with? When he was in World War I, and he was injured, and he was 19 or something like that, and he fell in love with his nurse, Aggie was her name, Agatha, who took care of him, and she was like 27 or 28, and they were really in love, and then he went back, I'm going to make money and come back and marry you, and then she wrote him what they call a Dear John letter. It's like, sorry, dear, we were just friends. I can only look at you and your mother. I guess it just devastated him and all that sort of thing. There's actually, unfortunately it wasn't very good, but called In Love and War, about that relationship. And Chris O'Donnell played Hemingway. Not very well. Sandra Bullock was pretty good. And it was directed by the same guy that directed Shadowlands. Richard Attenborough was a great, he directed Gandhi too, but it just didn't work, unfortunately, which is a shame because it's a true story. Anyway, okay, where was I? That story, of course, became Farewell to Arms, if you know that. What's that?
I'm about to read that.
Just for fun? Or?
Not
Oh, that kind. Okay, oh, good. Okay, yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. It's good. Of course, it's depressing, but
cool.
cool. I'm ready. Death, give me death. Okay, so so looking at number 4, so we have an elegiac, melancholy mood. Okay, like I said, partly because the Christian heaven has not yet been revealed. I mean, the men know that mortality. That's scary, isn't it? Sounds like the holes are being sprayed down or something. Yeah. What do you think? It's a vacuum? Maybe it's a vacuum. I'm not going to look. Okay. I guess you're right. Maybe one of those things they polish the floor with, those giant things. Okay. Anyway, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah. Okay. So they know that mortality is the gift of Iluvatar, and they know they will not be forever, linked to the cycles of this world, but they still don't have a clear perception of things, right? Even the wonderful thing that Gandalf says to Pippin in the movie, which is based on the novel, and it's there too in a different way, right? But what does he say? Let me see. The gray rain curtain, the gray rain cloud of the sky will be pulled aside, and all will turn to silver glass. And then you see it. What do you see, Gandalf? White shores, and beyond that, a far green country under a swift sunrise. Right? The weird thing about that is that really is more of a description of going back to Valinor rather than heaven. But it's part of it, But ultimately, that's kind of what happens if you take the boat like Frodo does at the end and take it back to the west. But there's a glimpse, but they still don't know. I mean, if you read the appendix, if you're really nerdy, well, look, you definitely want to at least read the appendix that tells the full story of Aragorn and Arwen. It's not that long. And as he's dying, he says to her, "In sorrow we must go, but not in despair." That's about the closest we get. Still pretty melancholy, but we don't have to go in despair, but we still have sorrow. Right? Sorrow, even if we don't have despair. So again, unlike the heroes of Greek mythology, those of Beowulf, they live under an ever-present doom. The monsters are at the center, and in many ways cannot be resisted. Right? In a way, Tolkien, calls it the long defeat. That's what history was for him. The long defeat. Sooner or later, we're going to lose. We keep going, right? And there will be a good ending all the way at the end. But there's still, and again, I mean, did that upset you when you read this? He kills Grendel. He kills Grendel's mother. He wins all the acclaim. He goes back. Everything's great. And then they fast forward 50 years. How many of you felt this when you were a kid? It really upsets you when you watched, like, The Lion King, and they're dancing around and they're crossing over that bridge that's made out of a tree, and they're like, and they all grow up, right? Yeah, you got it exactly, right? Did that ever make you sad when you were a kid? Right? Oh, even Lion King you couldn't watch. Why?
I don't know.
Constantine, isn't that like a spiritual warfare thing?
There's like suicide.
Yeah, I didn't even watch that one. I thought that was just very strange. Parents can be strange, literally. I taught this girl, it was 10 or 15 years ago, and her parents were very overprotective, and I remember she was my advisee, and I had to call her on the phone because she was missing her deadline, as she always was, And her father answered the phone. Her father was screening her phone calls. She was in college. And then we were talking about something else, about movies, and she said, "Oh, my family's favorite movie we watch all the time is Silence of the Lambs." So your father screens your phone calls, but he lets you and encourages you to watch Silence of the Lambs. I don't know. Parents are strange. Ultimately it's well made, but it's like...
All the weird, crazy psycho parents.
Maybe that's it, yeah. There are some parents that are into that psycho stuff, but don't bring your kids into that. Not, what? Oh, really? Maybe because the death of the father was scary, or maybe that, because it is scary. I mean, that was the first time they did that since what movie? Just killed off a parent like that. You know, the first movie they did that? Yeah, you got it, Bambi. Very good. Mother, I love that. Then his father shows up. Bambi, I've abandoned you your entire life. You don't know who I am, but listen to me. I love it. Bambi. Anyway, it's just great stuff.
Bambi 2 was better than Bambi 1. Bambi 2.
Oh, was there a Bambi 2?
Yeah, it's like... it's what takes place after...
Maybe I did see it.
Takes Bambi, and it's like the father raising Bambi. Pretty cute.
Oh, okay. Maybe I saw it. Well, if you go online, there's this cheap little thing they made a long time ago called Bambi versus Godzilla. You ever seen it?
What?
And it's like a cartoon that's just like line drawings, right? And you see Bambi. That was it. Go Google it. Maybe you can find it. I forget that. Bambi versus Godzilla. Oh, anyway. By the way, my son and I, during this weekend, on Friday night, because I have HBO Max for a brief period, we watched King Kong versus Godzilla. It is an absolute moron movie, but it's fun to watch. But oh my gosh. The plot is absolutely insane. But you're only there to watch the two fight, basically. But oh my gosh. Oh, that was such a disappointment. It should have been good, but it was a disappointment. What's that? Wonder Woman 84? Yeah, it just wasn't. She was good, but the movie wasn't
she
good.
was good.
Yeah,
But,
it just.
Okay, it seems that pretty much the exact same plot as the last one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it
Only
just.
the last one was better.
People can't. There are no new ideas. There are no new ideas. I know. It's a shame. It's a shame. But anyway, okay. I was just watching again last night. Probably the best of them, and I agree with Dr. Bolston, is Captain America's Civil War. It was really good. And you should watch that before you watch the new series,
Yes.
Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You'll understand it much more if you go back and watch.
You have to watch them all.
Well, I know all of them, but especially watch that one, and you'll, because it's very good. Falcon is very good. They've had 3 seasons, and it's really good. Anyway, where was I? Okay, so again, and this is why I would argue that only a pagan or stoic kind of heroism and courage can resist them, even though the resistance is partly doomed, if not ultimately futile. I mean, in this world where everything's going to collapse, the closest you can come to heroism is a kind of stoicism. I'm tough. I'm not going to let them see me sweat. I'm going to be a guard. I'm going to do it. Right? But again, it's more maybe an Old Testament kind of courage than a New Testament kind of courage. But again, it's because the author is faithful to that, and we often see that in. I've often argued that some of you know that. Okay, there are the 4 classical virtues and the 3 theological virtues. Right, the 4 classical virtues are the ones that the higher Greeks and Roman pagans knew about. Right? People like Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero all wrote about them, right? Virgil, too. And can anybody name for me the 4 classical virtues? Give me one. Courage, okay? Sometimes known as fortitude. What else? Good. Temperance, self-control, temperance. Courage, temperance, what else? Not humility, that would be more of a Christian virtue. The classical, say? Justice, good. Justice. And there's one more. Prudence, you said prudence or wisdom, okay? So, and what's interesting, and then the 3 theological virtues from 1 Corinthians 13 are faith, hope, and love, okay? Faith, hope, and Sydney? No, faith, hope, and love. Okay. Inside joke. Okay, so we've got courage, self-control, wisdom, and justice, okay? Now, I would argue this, and if you think about it, okay? So there are nine, walkers, right? There are 9 walkers, right? But of course, Boromir gets knocked out, right? And so there are 8, right? Robert hasn't come yet to defend him, right? And then we all know that Merry and Pippin are the same person, okay? So we would, in a sense, okay.
Knock Gandalf out because he died.
Oh well, but I mean for this. Now, this is kind of cool if you just think about this, right? So you've got 4 hobbits, which again I'm reducing to 3, okay? Sam, Frodo, and Merry Pippin, okay? And then there are 4 people over here: Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, and Gandalf. Okay, I mean and Aragorn. Okay, so Judge, I want you to think about this. Whether or not now he didn't write this in a letter, but I'm going to argue this anyway. Okay, if you look at these 4 virtues, okay, and you look at the 4 non-Hobbit characters, Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, and Gimli, okay, would one of them, which one would embody justice? Well, who has to have justice? Aragorn, because he's the king, right? So Aragorn, and especially at the end of it all, we see his justice, right? Which one, this one's pretty obvious, which one has wisdom? Gandalf, right? He's the prophet, if you will. And then, again, for courage, which one? Gimli, okay? You don't see that guy sweat, right? And then, of course, Legolas, we see more self-control, because the elves generally have that sort of temperance, right? So I would argue, that's it. Here, look at this, okay? Which of the hobbits really embodies love? It's his love that saves the day. Love, who shows pity, is Frodo, okay? And it's really Frodo's love, or at least pity, for Gollum that's going to save the day, okay? What does Sam have? Sam is an absolute perfect embodiment of what? They say hope, okay? In one of the speeches I gave, the best example of why Sam represents hope is because he brings his pots and pans with him into Mordor, just in case they have time for a stew. Is that hope or what? That's either complete stupidity or unbelievable. And you remember in the movie particularly how it kills him to let go of those pots and pans? Oh. Unfortunately, because we were watching the theatrical rather than the extended, we missed that great moment in the extended when Sam drops it. Get it, Frodo! Frodo, his treasure, get it! And he almost dies getting it. And what is it? It's the salt! Hey, in case we have time for a little stew. I just love it, It's hysterical. But anyway, so, and then I would say Merry and Pippin together might represent faith, okay? Because both of them, as we'll see next week, they both swear allegiance to, Pippin swears allegiance to Denethor, good, and Merry swears allegiance to Theoden. And it seems to be happening almost at the exact same time across there, which is just a wonderful doubling that happens. But anyway, you will be as a father to me for a little while. So, and it's that beautiful. Okay, but anyway, so. And it makes sense that the hobbits are looking for, because in a sense the hobbits are going to become us. I mean, there are men, right? But the hobbits seem to be the ones that are going to be more like us somehow in the long run. What's that? You like to eat? Okay. You just want a hobbit. Okay, they're always hungry. 5 meals a day. Okay. Now another thing, number 4. One of the things that really I dug into with Beowulf after knowing Lord of the Rings is. One of the things about Lord of the Rings is the way it's layered, right? There's layers and layers of history when you read Lord of the Rings, right? Because all over Middle-earth are the ruins, mostly of the Númenóreans who came, 3,000 plus years ago. Right? A lot of those things, and wherever we go, we see layers and layers of ruins, which is wonderful, right? And I think I mentioned before that. Even though King Kong was a good movie, I'm not sure why Peter Jackson remade it. I mean, the original is perfect. Why do you remake it? But I think that he was trying, and it didn't quite come across, because King Kong, that island was supposed to have been inhabited by different people. Like, obviously, the native people we meet in the movie did not build those huge walls, right? The way they're presented. So there must have been an older race there. We get glimpses of it, but it doesn't work because King Kong doesn't have the layering that Lord of the Rings does. He tried, but I don't think it worked. But here, both of them, and look at this long quote that I've put there, again, that comes from Monsters and the Critics. Okay, he says this of Beowulf. Okay, I'm saying that Beowulf is old, but it captures an even older time. This makes it layered in the same way. Look, okay, Beowulf writes Tolkien, and like I said, to me, whether he knows it or not, Tolkien is describing Lord of the Rings. I mean, he hasn't written it yet because it's 1936, but he has written most of the Silmarillion by now. And he says this: the Lord of the Rings is, Beowulf is now to us itself ancient, and yet its maker, the author, was telling of things already old and weighted with regret. You know, people still argue when Beowulf was written, 800, 700, 600, somewhere in that, somewhere between 500 and 900. Okay? Last time I talked to Dr. Grubbs, he seemed to think they were making for an earlier date, more. I always like to put him at the same time as Alfred the Great, but it looks like it may have been even older, maybe even 600 or something. We don't know. But in any case, whenever the author of Beowulf is living, he's writing about something that's much older. I mean, you do understand that Homer, who put together the Iliad Odyssey, lived about 500 years after the historical Trojan War. Okay? So this can happen. Oral tradition can carry down stories for a long, long time. So anyway, he says, it is now to himself, and yet its maker was telling of things already old and weighted with regret, and he expended his art in making keen that touch upon the heart which sorrows have, that are both poignant and remote. I know. Okay, when do you feel better or more cathartic? After a good laugh or a good cry? It's weird. I mean, you would think everybody would say good laugh, but a lot of people, maybe after a good cry. No, you prefer the good laugh? Oh, you're like the cry. Good. The good cry. I mean, there's something about that, and that's part of the element. I mean, didn't you notice all these guys, I guess mostly girls, but I guess guys write. Do guys read Nicholas Sparks too, or only girls? Or do guys just don't admit it when they like it? I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? Am I not saying his name right? Nicholas Sparks? You know, he's the, what are the names of all them? The Notebook?
I've never seen that.
You've never seen any of that? Okay. Anyway, a lot of these movies that have come out are based on this guy. Nicholas Sparks writes these novels. I can't remember all the names now. But anyway, in most of those movies, there's some romance, and then somebody dies. One of the two lovers dies, and it's like, why do I want to watch a movie like this? But I don't know. And yet sometimes there is a sort of cathartic kind of thing. But again, only Tolkien is this idea of poignant and poignant. Poignant is grief-stricken. It's even. It's hard to say. The word poignant, there's even a little bit of a pain there. But there's also an intensity, a kind of beauty, a poignancy. Right? There's a little bit of poignancy to your statue there, Anthony, with the ancestor. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Again, there's a sense of loss, a sense of layering, a sense of freedom with the bird flying off, but also a sense of being grounded. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that Tolkien loved. You know, that sense, poignant and remote. If the funeral of Beowulf moved once like the echo of an ancient dirge — a dirge is a song you sing at a funeral, right? Like the echo of an ancient dirge, far off and hopeless, it is to us as a memory brought over the hills, an echo of an echo. Isn't that beautiful? It's so old and long gone, right? A memory of a memory. Which is what happens when we read something like The Lord of the Rings. Behind it is age and more age and more age, going back farther and farther, inaccessible. It can't be changed. That leads to the sadness and poignancy of it. Like I said, when I read this, I feel, that's what it feels like to read Lord of the Rings. It's what it feels like to read Beowulf, too. But it's what it feels like to read Lord of the Rings. There is not much poetry in the world like this. And then he says, and although Beowulf may not be among the very greatest poems of our Western world in its tradition, he's going to argue there are things greater, but Beowulf has its own individual character and peculiar solemnity. You see how Tolkien learned something from Shakespeare, even if he said he didn't like him. And that's how to mix together Anglo-Saxon Germanic words with Latiny words and bring them together. Right? It has a peculiar solemnity. How would you define that word, solemnity? Solemn, of course, is the word we use too. Alone? Okay, that's interesting. Like solace, solemnity. There's like a beauty and yet isolated at the same time. Beautiful yet alone. Solemnity. And again, we use the word solemn, right? Where it's, there might be joy there, but there's no laughter per se, right? There's a seriousness, a gravitas. I was just talking about this in my other class, but I don't remember why. That we do something very odd when the judge walks into the room and they say, whatever, and he comes down, and what is everybody supposed to do? They're all supposed to rise, but what don't they do? We don't clap, you got it, right? We all stand, but we don't applaud. There's not many times when we do that, where we stand up, but we don't applaud. The other time we do that, ladies, this happened to you, maybe, at a wedding. When the bride comes, everybody stands, but they wait for the last kiss, then everybody applauds, right? When they give the kiss and they come back down. But when the bride goes forward, everybody stands in honor, but they don't clap. And this is important to me because when I first came to HBU 30 years ago, we had this really annoying tradition. And we don't have that many traditions, so we keep them even if they're stupid. And when someone would come to speak for convocation, they would come up and whoever introduced them say, let's give so-and-so a traditional HBU welcome. And you know what the traditional HBU welcome was?
We definitely don't do that.
We don't do that anymore. And I love, because you could tell which were the speakers that they didn't warn about that. And some of them were like, completely thrown off. It's like, have I just come to my own funeral? And it was really weird. We finally got rid of it. We did it, for the first 10 years I was here, and they'd been doing it before that, right? And I remember I got a chance to speak at convocation, and then they sat down and they said, man, that feels as weird as I thought it would. And then I went out with my speech. But I don't remember who finally got rid of it. What's that? Oh, you would fight this? I know, but there it is. There's a kind of solemnity in there. And there are many times in church, of course, where you stand in a more liturgical church. We're Baptists. We're too lazy. We sit down, right? The Baptists stand up when they read the Bible. That to me sort of almost borders on bibliolatry. But anyway, but in a more traditional church, a lot of times you'll stand at different points. Sometimes Catholics will often kneel for a few points. I couldn't be my knees couldn't take being a Catholic. Do you have good knees, Paula? Oh, you don't. Yeah, that's even a lot of people. Yeah, the other people that are always kneeling, Catholics and the Japanese. You ever watch Japanese movies? They're always doing this knee, and I'm just looking at them, and I'm like in pain just watching it. I just cannot do that, right? That's true. There's a lot. That's right. There's a lot of kneeling for prayer and stuff. But I've tried it. It's like no. Now the funny thing is, if you go to an Anglican church, right, which is very high, they do a lot of kneeling, but they usually give you a kneeling bench. They're very nice. They kind of pull down like this, and you can kneel on it, right? There's also a great movie in the movie Cleopatra. Have you seen Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor? When she's with Julius Caesar, and he has to kneel because she's supposed to be a goddess, right? The pharaoh. She kicks him a little cushion, right? And then she doesn't give the cushion to Mark Antony. Kneel, She's like something like, I expected it of Julius Caesar, I demanded of you. It's because it's really a story about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. That's really what it's about. But anyway, they got married, divorced, they married each other people, they came back and they got married again. And there's actually a verse in the Bible that says, if you get divorced and then you marry someone else and then you get married again, you are accursed. There's actually a verse in the Bible that says, that's wrong. Do you know what other couple did that? Let's see, because she knows her Hollywood. You know another Hollywood couple? Were married, got divorced, married someone else, came back, got married again? It was actually Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. Yeah, they were a good couple. Anyway. Man. Okay, where was I? Have you watched it yet? Netflix has a movie about Audrey Hepburn. Is it good? So? It's worthwhile. I'll have to watch it. I just noticed it. Anybody else seen it? It's a new. It's a movie, right? Not a documentary. Oh, it is a documentary. Okay, but I'll watch it. We got to see what it says. Anyway, okay. Again, it's like the echo of an echo, right? Because it has its own individual character and peculiar solemnity. It would still have power, Tolkien says, had it been written in some time or place unknown and without posterity. if it contained no name that could now be recognized or identified by research. In other words, even if it was a wholly other thing with no connection to anything, it would still move us. It still has a strange quality all of its own. Right? But yet, Beowulf, it is in fact written in a language that after many centuries has still essential kinship with our own. I mean, Old English, it's still recognizable, not to me, but to people like Bolston. It's still recognizable. It's very, very Germanic, but it's still our language, okay? He says, it was made in this land, right? Even though, like I said, it's set in Sweden and Denmark, but it was written in England. It was made in this land and moves in our northern world beneath our northern sky, the sort of whole Nordic world, right? And for those who are native to that tongue and land, it must ever call with a profound appeal until the dragon comes. Only Tolkien would write that. And only Tolkien would write that in a highly scholarly paper. Isn't that wonderful? If I was in the audience, I would have been applauding, of all this sophisticated stuff, and he throws it in. It's about the dragons, right? Man, this hopelessness before the monsters, this fighting of a doomed cause, this mood of sorrow and regret is more pagan, and it gives resonance to Beowulf. That's me summing up there. So, and again, it is pagan, but it is much more Norse than it is Greco-Roman. Right? And that's, like I said, when I started reading that, I'm like, man, this is weird. It's different. There's the Egyptian mythology. I was never too crazy about that because, they're all jackal heads and stuff like that. But Norse is so different. Totally different quality. And if you eat that nasty fish all day, maybe, you'll be pretty depressed too. But anyway, just watch Ingmar Bergman movies. They have that same kind of gloom. I mean, I love them all. But they have that same kind of gloom. Right? Wow, wonderful stuff. Okay. Now, number 5. Beowulf sees himself as having the mission to be the guard of all that is good and civilized. And we see that example over and over. He is a guard. Right? And we're going to get examples of this in Lord of the Rings. Right? I told you there's a great line coming when Gandalf is talking to Denethor. And remember, Denethor is the steward of Gondor. He is still holding it for the return of the king. And there's a wonderful line, I don't think it's in the movie actually, where Gandalf says to him, I am a steward also. I don't think that was in the movie. But he, again, because Gandalf is a wizard who's been sent into Middle Earth, right, to be a guard and to watch and to be a steward, not to be king. That was, Saruman's problem, his pride and ambition to take over. The Istari, or the wizards, were supposed to assist. And he is a steward waiting. And of course, what is the wonderful line he says when he crowns Aragorn? He says, now begin the days of the king. Right? And may they be blessed. Right? It's ready for him to turn over. He crowns him. Just like when the Pope crowned Charlemagne, Holy Roman Emperor, in 800, Christmas Day 800, in the old St. Paul's Cathedral, rather St. Peter's Cathedral, the old one. Anyway, cool stuff. Okay, now, just talk about this, okay? How is Grendel different than, like, other monsters that you might know about from Greek or Roman mythology? What makes Grendel so memorable? He does. He just loves. This is what I said before. He's like the first serial killer. He loves to just cause mayhem and destruction. He has no reason. It's what I call gratuitous violence. It's just violence as an end in itself. That's why people were so horrified by 9/11. At least when those darn IRA people, the Irish, at least they might blow something up and it was absolutely hitting, but at least they had like a demand, like set Ireland free and we'll stop. Okay. What was so horrible about 9/11, in addition to just the horror of it was just done. I mean, is there a demand? Like, do this, do that? Grendel, it's not about it's not about like winning money. It's just desolation, right? It's just spreading darkness. In fact, it seems that one of the reasons he attacks Heorot, that's the beautiful meat hall, is just because everybody's having so much fun, right? Because they're having. Do you know where you catch a little bit of that Teutonic sense of fatalism? What famous poem by Edgar Allan Poe about a pair of lovers? And we loved with a love that was more than love, me and my Annabelle Lee. And why do the angels kill her? It just seems like they're jealous. You know, the thrill, what is it, chilling and killing my Annabelle Lee. It almost seems like they just don't like. Oh, my voice actually changed when I did that. Okay, that's weird. Like you do when you're a kid. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Same thing with this stupid mask. Tuesday is my second vaccine. Do you think I... What's that?
It's my first on Friday.
Oh, good, okay. And of course, after I get my second shot and if a couple weeks go by, if I write to HBU, can I now lecture without a mask? What do you think they'll say? No. Remember, June 1st is coming. That's the end of all this for HBU, they say. Did you get that email?
Yeah. Fun.
Yeah. That's right, you'll be gone. Is anybody else graduating? Oh, no, most of you are graduating seniors. Actually, the only one that's not a graduate. Are you also, Marcy? Oh, you still have one more to go. When do you graduate? Okay. Well, we might be able to sneak you into that class if you want. In the fall, I'm teaching a class for the second year, MFAs, Chris and his cohort, where we're going to read, we're only going to read Ovid's Metamorphoses, which you read already, same book, but then it's mostly going to be looking at art based on that. So we might be able to get you in there if you want to take another one. But I think most of you, it's just so. The only one's not graduating, 1, 2, 3. Right? You're not graduating, right? Yeah. All the rest of you are going to graduate. Yeah. So, well, that's why I always make you do your last thing in the last day of class so I can get your grades in. Okay? Because I have to get in early grades. So anyway, okay. Where was I? So anyway, it's like the joy of the mead hall is what attracts Grendel, and this is so cool. And one wonders what was there in the original pagan myth, because our author tells us that Grendel is a descendant of who? Cain, right? The one who killed his brother. And notice that Beowulf particularly hates anyone guilty of kinslaying. And who's the big nasty dude in this book? Remember his name? Starts with a U? Unferth, right? And we're not really given the whole story, but apparently he killed one of his own siblings or something. I mean, that's like that sense of taboo guilt, those that have done that. And Beowulf wants nothing to do with somebody that like you said, that even like in prison with tough, hardened prisoners, you do not want to be in prison if you're guilty of what crime? Good, any kind of child molestation or something like that. If the other prisoners find out about it, they're going to beat you up. Okay, these may be tough, hardened criminals, but they still have a sense of what's really wrong, right? You don't hurt a child, right? And apparently they're often beaten up and stuff. But anyway, so Beowulf has that hatred of it. So again, there's this idea. There's even a little bit about creation and all that sort of stuff. But this original fratricide has given birth to this race of demonic monsters who come in and just tear people to bits. Again, very, very bloody. As I call it, gratuitous destruction. I don't know if you know. In the Lord of the Rings, we're about to meet a monster who is a perfect example of gratuitous violence, who just devours for the sake of devouring. And who is that? Shelob, okay? At least Sauron wants power, right? But Shelob only wants to increase the darkness around her. I think Shelob is one of the best depictions of evil in all literature. Terrifying. And I don't know if I said this yet, but, even though, I do not think Satan is the hero of Paradise Lost, you can still make a good argument that Milton messes up in making him seem so charismatic. You can still make that argument. Nobody is attracted to Shelob or Sauron for that matter, right? I mean, now, we are attracted to Boromir, but there is repentance in Boromir, right? But the real evil, the Black Riders, right? Do we really feel any sympathy for them? We see how evil just devours itself.
Well, we also see what they were to begin with.
Good. And they fell. And then there's what's his name? Gollum. There's a few moments when he might come around. And we might get there today, I don't know. When he might come around and then the moment's lost. Partly because Sam calls him a sneak. Sneaking. Just reliving the movie every time I watch it. It's just so great. It's just so good to see it. The movie is so good that many years ago, the kids and I went to the Houston Symphony, and we watched the movie while the orchestra played the whole score, including people singing and, do what they call it, vocalization, all that sort of stuff. Anybody ever do that? They do that for Star Wars and other things. But the trouble was, you pay all this money to go hear the symphony, but that movie is so darn good that you end up forgetting that the symphony's there and you watch the movie. I mean, that's how good it is. So why did I even do this? I mean, I'm thinking I'm just way home because I've completely forgotten I'm in an orchestra hall and I'm completely zeroed in on the movie. It's just unbelievable, those movies. Anyway, and by the way, have any of you ever seen the movies Peter Jackson made before that? All these schlock movies and stuff like that? It's unbelievable. He did make one interesting movie called The Frighteners that's worth seeing, but even that's whacked out. But other stuff he did is really weird and graphic sometimes. I don't know, just out of the blue. I think he was born to make those movies or something.
In my personal opinion, Peter Jackson peaked at Lord of the Rings and went downhill.
Yeah, I know, because even The Hobbit, Now, did any of you ever think what The Hobbit would have been like if Guillermo del Toro directed it? Because he was supposed to be the director. And I believe that's the guy who did Pan's Labyrinth. He probably would have done it, I think, in a more fairy tale way. Because Guillermo del Toro is one of those people, even if you don't like his plots that are weird, his set pieces are so inventive and wild. I did enjoy Shape of Water. It really isn't just about a girl sleeping with a fish. That's really not what it's about. It's actually a beautiful movie. But anyway, he won the Oscar for that. But yeah. And did any of you see Lovely Bones? I mean, some of it works. That's the other Peter Jackson movie. He made King Kong. He made Lovely Bones. And then The Hobbit. I don't think he's made anything else. He's made some documentaries. Yeah, the girl that's killed by, and it's, her view of heaven, and some of it works. It's worth watching once. And King Kong is actually good. It's just unnecessary. Why do you remake a perfect movie? I mean, we didn't need it. Did he direct? I don't think he directed one, did he? You might be thinking Andy Serkis. Andy Serkis played Caesar. Yeah, he does all the. He was also King Kong, by the way. He was also the face of King Kong. Yeah. Whatever. They bring him in to do all that stuff. Poor guy ends up being freaky. Anyway. Did he make that? Oh, are you sure he didn't produce it? Did he direct it? He might have just produced that one. But now that you say that, I don't know if I've seen that movie yet. I don't think it got very good reviews. Did you see it? Was it awful? Yeah. I mean, it died quickly. I wonder if he directed it or just produced it. I mean, before Lord of the Rings, he did a lot of stuff. Like I said, weird stuff. Graphic, but not so much horrific. It's just kind of odd. I don't know what to say. It's just odd. Anyway, okay, where was I? He did make another weird movie that's worth seeing, but it's very strange, and it's called, I can't remember what it's called now. These two girls. Was it? Frighteners is fun. It's weird. But he made another movie. These two girls have become friends and have this fantasy life that they live together. And I can't remember what it was called. It was very strange. But yeah, I don't remember. Anyway, I get off on the movies. Okay. When is the Oscars, by the way? Is it pretty soon? Or did I miss it? What? Yeah, it should be soon. Now that I think of it, it should be soon. Oh, a couple more weeks. Okay. I did watch The Sound of Metal, which is good. It's a hard movie to watch. It's on Amazon for free. About this rock and roll guy that goes deaf and dealing with it. And it's worth watching, but it's hard to watch. But it's extremely well done. Anyway, okay, so where was I? Boom, 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 boom. Okay, so I don't know if any of you noticed it, but there's a line in there when Grendel comes into Harrow and kills everything. He can't approach the throne because it's holy. That's the anointed king. That's just kind of cool because normally I said Gollum, anything that has to do with the elves hurts him. It hurts us. It hurts us. It hurts us. All of that sort of stuff. Just like the Dracula can't take anything that's holy or sacred. Again, we've got that sort of stuff, right? Again, I talk about the fatalism, a lot of all the different things like that. Let's look at maybe the most famous passage. I'll give you the page number in this book, since some of you have it, and then I'll give you the line number. It's page 13 in this book, this edition, and it's line 175 about 175. Page 13 in this version. I'll just read it, sorry if you don't have one. And he's talking about when Grendel is destroying everything. And I don't know if you noticed, but Hrothgar, who's a very noble and strong king, he just sort of loses his will. He just sort of becomes, what's the word I want? It's got to be a good word for it. He becomes lethargic, like he seems unable to do anything. He just loses his will. He becomes indecisive. And think about it, that's the case with actually both Theoden and Denethor, in their own different ways. Become just unable to deal with it until they're riled up. It takes not only Gandalf sort of exercising him, but Aragorn has to help as well, and get Theoden to get going, right? But anyway, so this is the scene. Everything's bad, and the other Danes go to the pagan shrines to ask for help. This is what it says. Sometimes at pagan shrines they vowed offerings to idols, swore oaths that the killer of souls, that's Grendel, but it sounds like the devil, doesn't it? That killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. And here's something that we do not get in any Greek mythology. That was their way. Suddenly we have a narrator who is separated from the people. I mean, there are places in Homer where Homer says, 10 men couldn't have lifted that stone as men are today. So there's a little bit of layering. There's a few places where we understand that Homer is living hundreds of years after the events. But not this difference here, right? That was their way. Their heathenish hope. And he's not making fun of them. Because he goes on, deep in their hearts they remembered hell. The almighty judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high king of the world, was unknown to them. And notice, he never mentions Jesus or something. It's more like Melchizedek, who visits Abraham, and what does he call God? Remember we talked about it. God Most High, El Elyon, God Most High. So we're using language for God that maybe a higher pagan with general revelation might have a glimpse of that, right? As did what famous pharaoh seemed to be moving towards monotheism. You know his name? Starts with an A, yeah. Do you know? Yeah, you said almost. Akhenaten, very good. And he famously wrote something called A Hymn to the Sun, right? Another person that seemed to come close in the Americas over here was one of the, I think was he a Mayan or an Inca, and his name was, darn it, what's the name of the guy in the Disney cartoon? Emperor's New Groove.
Oh,
Cusco, yeah, there was a real Cusco. And there was, not that guy I don't think, but there was a real Cusco who also, like Akhenaten, seemed to have a perception of but it was even better, because Akhenaten was worshiping the sun. This guy, Cusco, was pointing to something behind the sun. Right? So you do get glimpses of this, whatever's, we've been able to find of that. Pretty cool.
Theory in world religions that's in contrast to the evolutionary theory.
Oh, good.
Of religion. That they're starting to find this out now due to the archaeological boom that we've had in the last 150 years.
Oh, right.
You trace most of these polytheistic religions back, they all started with
Good.
pretty much.
Good. What Bill's getting at is, people don't realize that in the modern academia, evolution is not just Darwin. Academia has bought into an evolutionary view of everything. So everything has to, and one of the reasons is this idea that in the beginning we were all crazy animists running around, then we evolved into, polytheism, pantheism, and then polytheism and monotheism, and then science, right? Whereas actually more and more we're finding that there was an original monotheism. I mean, the Bible suggests we were all monotheists and then fell away. So it's not evolution, it's what's called entropy.
The most powerful example is King G. He's
Good.
the God, they actually, in Chinese, is God of the Most High.
Wow, see, there it
He's
is.
a singular God that they all worship. And animism came after.
Came after that. Isn't that interesting?
They're finding that out more and more, that it's all began monotheistic and shifted.
There's even a book called Eternity in Their Hearts by Don Richardson, a famous missionary. And he documented people in parts of China, different parts of the world, that again, when you push them, they did have an understanding of an original monotheism, but they sort of understood that they had angered the god, and now they're sort of enslaved to the spirits or whatever, and they're terrified of them. They can't go back. And so we're fine. So it's a good point. I mean, that you go far enough back, you find this. And so, I'm wondering, maybe there were touches of this that our poet here has found. But again, he said, because that real God was unknown to them, of course you think of Acts chapter 17, tomb to an unknown God, but because they don't know that God, they don't really have hope. They don't have hope beyond the world, beyond the funeral, whatever. Oh, cursed is he who in time of trouble has to thrust his soul in the fire's brace, forfeiting help, he has nowhere to turn. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. And then he goes on. But again, what's beautiful is he's not making fun. He feels sorrow for them. These poor people don't really have hope beyond this. No hope beyond that. What does N.T. Wright say? We really believe in life after life after life, right? You ever heard that one, Bill? N.T. Wright talks about, the life after life after life, right? In other words, because we die, but then eventually we'll have resurrection bodies and be in heaven. So, you haven't read as much as N.T. Wright? There's a lot, man. That guy. Yeah. It's funny, because he writes under two names. When he writes for the Brits, he calls himself N.T. Wright. But in America, some of his books are Tom Wright. Because hey, I'm American. Hey, Tom, it's stuff. British with their initials, like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and G.K. Chesterton and all sorts of things like that. Right? Anyway. I don't know, maybe I don't. It's just something that you see over there, right? And it is funny. Anyway, strange. But anyway, again, that gives us that sense, that layering sense. Right? Look, let me just show you one real interesting passage where we get both the beauty of Heorot and what I call the flash forward. So this is, again, page 7, or if you have any other book, it's about line 7. And he starts talking about the mead hall. Line 69. For men to work on a great mead hall, in other words, where mead is served, meant to be a wonder of the world forever, it would be his throne room, and there he would dispense his God-given goods to young and old. That's how the heroic code works in Beowulf. I, as the king of the mead hall, give out gifts, right? And then you return by fighting on my side. And if you didn't understand, that's what happens with Wiglaf, the good guy at the end. He's like, hey, did Beowulf not give us meeds of honor in the mead hall? Did he not give us these things? We need, and then he says, shame to all you people that ran away in terror, right? Did you forget all the things he gave you, the gift exchange? In that sense, it's similar to the Greeks and Romans. But at the mead hall, these things happen. He says, far and wide through the world, I have heard, always, it's like, man, I heard about this mead hall. I wish I could have seen it. But I've heard rumors of this glorious place. That Wollsted were sent to many people, and soon it stood there, finished and ready in full view, the Hall of Halls, Heorot. Again, in The Lord of the Rings, it's Meduseld. Meduseld is the mead hall of Edoras. Okay, so Edoras is the capital of Rohan, the Rohirrim, and in that is Heorot, where a lot of things take place there. So he says, Heorot was the name he had settled on, whose utterance was law. Nor did he renege, but doled out rings and torques at the table. Anybody know what a torque is? Those are those big, you got it, those big metal things. Only the Vikings can wear man necklaces and man bracelets and look cool. Now look like an idiot, right? But they did. You've probably seen movies when they would wear around their neck. The torque, it's called. And again, he handed those out at the mead hall. The hall towered, its gables wide and high, and awaiting a barbarous burning. That doom abided, but in time it would come. See, again, always, like in the very midst of how beautiful it is, but it's all going to burn down. I mean, do any of you have friends like that are just absolutely pessimistic? I've got a friend, his name is Dr. Bolston, and he's always pessimistic. I love that guy. But we have to balance each other with his pessimism and my optimism, because he's already, In fact, I reminded him of back in the summer, he was absolutely sure there was going to be rioting in the streets in Houston. People were going to be going through neighborhoods, shooting people up. He said, you better get a gun and learn how to use it. He was like really scared. And I reminded him of it just a couple weeks ago, and he's like, well, that would have happened. We escaped it. It was really funny. But I remember he was like scary. He scares the heck out of me. Sometimes I got to stop talking to him. because he gets me too worried. But anyway, but
I can relate.
can you? Oh no, you're like that. Yeah, I love it. It's like he's great. No, he's great. But always. Oh, it's gonna. What? Well, you know what he's like. What character in Chronicles of Narnia? It's Puddleglum. Okay, optimistic pessimist or the pessimistic optimist. Okay. Oh well, I'm sure you won't like that food. Why would you like it? Oh, I know it's going to get all smoky in here and terrible. Those of you, well, most of you in this class have read The Silver Chair. Like Eeyore, very good. It's like Eeyore, yeah. By the way, nobody's made any Clinton jokes. You got the chance. Hey, Anthony, do you know Clinton? You're missing it. Anthony is here in person. Anthony, would you like to say something? Oh, there we go. Okay, so he's good. He's not going to go back, right? Do you all actually watch Game of Thrones? No one's ever seen Game of Thrones? No one's ever seen Game of Thrones?
Yes.
Okay. There's just this great line where, like I said, only in Game of Thrones is the moral center of the Game of Thrones a eunuch and a lascivious dwarf. But anyway, there's this great line where the dwarf says, "This is what our friendship's like. I make eunuch joke, and he makes dwarf jokes." And the guy says, "I never make dwarf jokes." And he's actually right. He never does make fun of him, but he always makes fun of him. Anyway, it's a great line. You think that, but he never does. Yeah, he's got his own scheming in the background, but he's in a sense a good guy. He even tries to kill off the bad girl and ends up getting roasted by a dragon,
He
doesn't he?
doesn't try to kill her off. He just
Well-
wants to, make sure she doesn't get thrown.
Well, that's true. Yeah, we got to stop her. Anyway, but so he says again, that doom abided, but in time it would come. The killer instinct unleashed among in-laws, the bloodlust rampant. Then a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. And here he comes in, right? It harrowed him to hear the din of the loud banquet every day in the hall, the harp being struck and the clear song of a skilled poet telling with mastery of man's beginnings, how the Almighty had made the earth a gleaming plain girdled with waters. In his splendor he set the sun and the moon to be earth's lamplight, lanterns for men. This sounds like Genesis, but also sounds a little bit like the Silmarillion, doesn't it? Right? The two lamps that later became the two trees. But again, the demon is upset to hear all these people having a good time. Right? It's terrible. There's a famous guy named H.L. Mencken, who was quite a cynic. And he said, the definition of a Puritan is someone who lays awake at night because he's sure that somebody somewhere is having a good time. So, don't want to become that kind of person, right? Oh, man. My poor friend. Are any of you watching The Chosen? Because it started again on Sunday. Oh, it was unbelievable. The second season has just started. And my friend Darren, we wrote this screenplay we're still trying to get made for the last 10 years. But anyway, he's actually part of the group that advertises The Chosen, right? And he's interviewed a lot of the actual actors and his friends. I was just talking to the phone with him today. And I asked him, did you enjoy watching it? He said, I missed it Sunday night because he was being nice and helping out this woman that he had to go meet. And while he was talking to her, she was railing about Christians watching movies about Christ. That's idolatrous. It's like, oh my God, I'm missing this. To me, it's crazy. Some of these people and this girl, this lady, she wasn't against Christian art, like medieval or Renaissance art, but she was against movies because it was
in like any form of imagery of Christ.
I guess, yeah, but in a movie. But she was okay with the pictures. So it's really, people, did you ever meet a Christian who they go to movies, but they'll only listen to Christian music? I mean, what is it about music? They'll see other things, but only in that one thing.
People who watch Christian movies, but no, they hate Christian art.
Or saying, the other way around. That's right, the other way around.
The cross,
Yeah.
stained glass
It's just
window.
odd. I don't know why we get into these things. But he's like,
I strongly dislike most Christian music.
well, it's just because it's bad music, you mean? Or it's not very well done. Yeah, that's just badly done. But I don't know, it's just odd how people, we get something in our mind. I guess all of us probably have something like that's wrong. There are certain things that are wrong, but I mean something that is not necessarily, but it's just it gets us mad. I don't know what it is. It's weird. But so my poor friend, he finally saw it the next day, but he's like, what am I doing? I'm missing the premiere so I can be with this lady who is attacking everything I love. Anyway, but yeah.
We tend to tell everybody what we're against and nobody knows what we're
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Why are we always against something? Man.
always have to be against something.
I spoke for something called Summit Ministries. It's a worldview academy. And the guy that used to run it would come up and he'd always give a speech and it would be A to Z. And he says, I'm going to talk about things I'm for, things I like. And so he started with A, and that was Adam and Eve. And he just went through all the things he loved. Nothing negative, all the things he loved. And it was just a great idea. And he just kind of winged it as he went through it. And it was pretty cool. Wait a minute, you were there, weren't you? It wasn't. It was Dr. David Noble, who was probably not there when you were there. Because he's way up in age. And he ran it for 50 years. But he's the one. It was Summit, the World Academy. Yeah, Summit, yeah. Yeah, but it was 10 years ago because he turned it down. Yes, that's a good book, yeah. I've got a copy of that. It's cool stuff. Yeah. They do, that's right, yeah, they keep updating it. It's pretty neat. But you know what is missing is the arts. There's no chart for like arts and music and, so they need to. That's why Nancy Piercy wrote her book. Anyway. So they come over. So times were pleasant for the people there until finally one came, a fiend out of hell, began to work his evil in the world. Grendel was the name of this grim demon, haunting at the marshes, marauding round the heath and the desolate fens. He had dwelt for a time in misery among the banished monsters, Cain's clan, whom the Creator had outlawed and condemned as outcasts. For the killing of Abel, the eternal Lord had exacted a price. Cain got no good from committing that murder, because the Almighty made him anathema. And out of the curse of his exile, there. Somebody like that? Oh, maybe that's Robert. I hope it's not Grendel. No, okay, good. Grendel is. Look at the hair, though, man. It could be Grendel. He's ready to go, man. Look at that. Sorry. Anyway, I'm just ready. He's like, ah.
To people about their hair.
Oh, sorry. That's pretty cool, man. Yeah, he's looking pretty good there. He's got it down, man. It's a Viking there.
Hey, Fabio.
Fabio! Oh, I haven't heard that name in a long time. Fabio, man, he would always appear on the covers of romance novels and stuff like that. Yeah, Fabio. But that's right, yeah. Hey, you could be Antonio Banderas. That's better. Cool guy, man. Antonio Banderas. Yeah? Oh, really? Oh! Wait a minute. What was the movie? Oh, really? Was it any good? No, really have to look. Actually, do you know what Antonio Banderas was in when he was very young? I'm pretty sure it was him. He was in a movie called... Well, no, the Zorro was good, but the 13th Warrior. Have you seen the 13th Warrior? No, but no. The reason I'm mentioning the 13th. Okay, it's based. You all probably know who Michael Crichton is. That's the guy who wrote Jurassic Park and what is it, Andromeda Strain. Well, he wrote a book. I think it's called Eaters of the Dead, which is like a realistic telling of Beowulf, and it's all told by a Muslim. What's the word I want? Traveler. Like who goes around the world and writes about it. There were Ibn Khaldun. I think it might have been a real person. Like amongst the Greeks, there was a guy named I've forgotten his name. Anyway, these people that travel the world and write their memoirs of it, right? So he was like the teller of the story, and it's the Beowulf story, but it's quote realistic. But it's worth watching. It's not great, but it's called The 13th Warrior, and I'm pretty sure Antonio Banderas is in it, if I remember. To watch it again. Have you heard of that one? Oh, one of those guys, yeah. No, you know what it was? It was that guy that was in, who was in the movie version of one of those guys, the ones that live forever, live up in the. Oh my gosh! 1 second. Oh my God! Oh my head! Oh my God! The one is it? Was he in it? You found the 13th Warrior. Okay, I was right. Okay, but I think it's got that other guy that was in the Highlander. Not Sean Connery, but that other guy that popped up in all those movies. I can't remember his name now. He's a pretty cool guy. Popped up in a lot of those action movies. Yeah, the younger guy. I can't remember his name right now, but I think he might have been in that movie too. But anyway, it's worth watching. The 13th Warrior, just to see a little turn. There is also a movie of Beowulf that's wild and wacko. I kind of enjoyed it. It's crazy. but it's one of those movies that's animated, but it's where they sort of paint over people. And Anthony Hopkins plays Hrothgar, and the Princess Bride plays his wife, and it's just called Beowulf, but it's actually based on a book by Neil Gaiman, and it's the Beowulf story, but we're going to find out what nobody else knows about it. So it gets really wild, and it turns out that Grendel's mother is an incredibly sexy Angelina Jolie, who's trying to seduce the guy to join her and get power. It's really wild. I mean, it's got everything in it, but it's why nobody. Have you seen it? It's just called Beowulf. It's insane, but it's done in such a way that everybody in the movie thinks it's Beowulf, but we know the real story. So sort of like when you watch Titanic, they did a really cool thing. The character played by Leo DiCaprio doesn't exist, but the reason only we know about him is he's not on the manifest because he won his ticket in that gambling game, and then he died, and nobody knows him except us and, of course, the girl. Right? It's that kind of clever thing. We know the true story that nobody else knows, right? So anyway, it's fun. And Angelina Jolie is, I hate to admit it, but she's sexy. Anyway, she's scary, but yeah. She's terrifying. She's Laura Croft Tomb Raider, right? Anyway, sorry. Okay, let's keep on. There's so much I can tell you about Beowulf. It's so much fun reading all these sorts of things. Yeah, no, we're talking about Angelina Jolie. One you love to hate. She's just a strange fish. Oh my gosh. Anyway. What's that?
I read something like this Hemsworth's wife, even though Hugh Jackman's wife won't let him work with her because she's known for a husband's unit.
Oh wow! Did you see that? There we go. Woo! Didn't Elizabeth Taylor steal away Debbie Reynolds' husband? Was it that? She stole everybody's husband. I think it was Debbie Reynolds' husband she stole away. Yeah, was that it? Yeah. These old Hollywood people. Man, you think the new Hollywood people are bad. They can be pretty bad back then, too. Man. Anyway, where was I? So, anyway, oh my gosh, there's so much I could tell you about. Okay, one thing, because I don't want to take forever, I do want to show you one passage that it's just, he must have had it in mind. Well, he did. I'm not even saying must. It's clear. Okay, if you have this, it's page 165. But I'll read it to you, just explain it to you. But it's 165, and it's line, let me see where I want to start. Let's see, 2,435. I think the line numbers are pretty much the same, whatever you have. This is one of the many tangents in Beowulf. It's always going off on tangents. Right? But Lord of the Rings does a sort of as well, not as much. But it's there to layer this whole society. And we're told a story, and this is so weird because it's almost like a flashback within a flashback. We have a tangent that tells us what seems to be a true story from a royal family, and then in the middle of telling that story, we get a sort of epic simile to explain what it was like. So we get this weird sort of, kind of looks like this. And any of you that have read Ovid's Metamorphoses know that that's how his stories work. Stories within stories within stories. Right? And, 2435, it says, for the eldest, Heribold, an unexpected deathbed was laid out for a brother's doing, when Hefsin bent his horn-tipped bow and loosed the arrow that destroyed his life. He shot wide and buried a shaft in the flesh and blood of his own brother. So, this is an accidental fratricide, where one brother kills another brother. And they're suggesting this really happened. It's a story, right? Now look what happens. It says, that offense, the brother killing the other brother, was beyond redress, a wrong footing of the heart's affections. For who could avenge the prince's life or pay his death price? Imagine if you're the father. How can I avenge my son? The only way to avenge my son is to kill his killer. But his killer is my other son. And it was an accidental death anyway. Best way to explain this, what's amazing about Beowulf and also about Lord of the Rings is at its core, Beowulf and Lord of the Rings are both stories with a clear sense of good and evil, virtue and vice, right? There is no doubt that Grendel's mother, and the dragon are just simply evil, right? And that Beowulf is good. And we get that same kind of simplicity in Lord of the Rings, and yet there's all sorts of ambiguity at the same time with all these stories. Now, in Beowulf, most of the ambiguity comes from stories that are like tied into it, right? That are woven in. Because Beowulf was also carried down by oral tradition, just like the Iliad and the Odyssey. In fact, if you want a little bit of insight into Beowulf, C.S. Lewis wrote a book called A Preface to Paradise Lost. And it's an excellent study of Paradise Lost, but the first 4 or 5 chapters go over the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and Beowulf. And it's worth reading the book just for that, even before you get to Milton. Because he really he basically tries to show the difference between a unself-conscious epic, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and a very self-conscious epic, the Aeneid. And then, of course, Beowulf is somewhere in between. It's an unconscious story carried down by oral tradition, but it does have a more self-conscious author who's some ways imposing his Christian ideas on it, but not overly doing so. Right? Anyway, it's worth reading if you pick up that. Okay, now, so we've got this moral dilemma, this horror. Look at this father. What is he going to do? How can he avenge? And then they say, it was like. And then we have what Homer would call an epic simile. And this little scene is known by critics as the father's lament. Now look at this central story. This one is not a real story. It's a simile to try to get into the mind of what it would be like to be the father of those 2 sons. This is what the author says. It was like the misery felt by an old man who has lived to see his son's body swing on the gallows. He begins to keen and weep for his boy, watching the raven gloat where he hangs. He can be of no help. The wisdom of age is worthless to him. Morning after morning, he wakes to remember that his child is gone. He has no interest in living on until another heir is born in the hall, now that his firstborn has entered death's dominion forever. He gazes sorrowfully at his son's dwelling, the banquet hall bereft of all delight, the wind-swept hearthstone. The horsemen are sleeping, the warriors underground. What was is no more. No tunes from the harp, no cheer raised in the yard. Alone with his longing, he lies down on his bed and sings a lament. Everything seems too large, the steadings and the fields. Could that not have been written yesterday? Does that not capture just, that may be my favorite passage in all of Beowulf. It captures human grief and human loss in such a powerful way. And when we look at this father who has lost his elder son, and the banqueting hall is now empty, and there is no joy, and he gives up all hope. Who are we talking about in Lord of the Rings? 2 people, really. Say it again? Yeah, Denethor and Theoden both. Denethor having lost Boromir, and Theoden lost a guy named Theodred. They don't say too much about it, but he has lost his son. The body is brought back. And again, that's just another way that Wormtongue is able to get a hold of him. Right? But this is it. That exact sorrow, that human cry of pain and loss, that lament, that's what gives both Beowulf and Lord of the Rings its peculiar solemnity. Again, a sort of poignancy, a sorrow, a grief that's almost like no other book, right? That has it quite like that. This is what makes it so unique and so timeless. And then it says, such was the feeling of loss endured by the Lord of the Geats after Heribald's death. Now we've gone back to our story. He was helplessly placed to set to rights the wrong committed, could not punish the killer in accordance with the law of the blood feud, although he felt no love for him. Heartsore, wearied, he turned away from life's joys, chose God's light, and departed, leaving buildings and lands to his sons, as a man of substance will. Denethor gives up. It's all going down. The West is dead. Men are dead. They're all going down. It's just a giving in to despair instead of a fighting against the monster. Unlike Theoden, who kind of knows it's hopeless. I mean, they do still win Helm's Deep, but it's only because First of all, Gandalf shows up with reinforcements, and of course the Ents crush all the bad guys. But this is what it's going to be the last ride of the Rohirrim. And he gets on the horses, and we will, and they'll remember us, right? And when he dies after the Battle of Pelennor Fields, now I will not feel ashamed to be in the company of my ancestors, basically in Valhalla, is what he's saying. It's great stuff. Isn't it great stuff? You see it, and again, so just you understand that Beowulf is not only there for its allusions and its plot and all that, it's there for its mood, that peculiar elegiac feel that's there. And of course, it's not there as much in The Hobbit. There's a few places where it is in The Hobbit, and that's not to say anything bad about The Hobbit. That's not the kind of book it is. And that's why it was uneasy. You know, Peter Jackson tried to make The Hobbit into Lord of the Rings, and it doesn't quite have that plot. It wasn't meant to. It never was meant to be that, right? And he tried. I mean, he tried hard. It was a noble attempt, but yeah, you know, to make it have that. And basically, if you watch the movies again, he takes The Hobbit and makes it darker and heavier, but he also made The Lord of the Rings a little bit lighter, right? I mean, you almost forget that Gimli is not really a comic figure in the novel. Okay? He's pretty funny, but somehow he's funny without losing his dignity or his strength or his courage. But he did. He made The Lord of the Rings a little bit lighter. He injected, and I'm glad he did, the way he used Pippin and Merry and all that to inject little bits of humor is just wonderful. I just love it. I mean, you know, it's there. There is humor in The Lord of the Rings, but the movie just upped it a little bit. So, oh my gosh. I mean, I don't have time for anything. Okay, there's just so much to do. There's just so much. Again, I won't read everything, but look at number 9. Again, as I said, there's a sense of great age, and there's also a sense that the writer of Lord of the Rings is not so much a writer as he is an editor. What do I mean by that? This is one of the things that Tolkien tried to convey. You get that sense, Claire? What does that mean? He's an editor. Good. Good. And what famous novel is also, does the author purport to be an editor and not an author? Oh, I didn't think about Dracula, but even older than that. But you're right, I guess Dracula too, that's right. It's epistolary. The very first novel is Don Quixote, right? Don Quixote. And actually, doesn't he claim he's getting it from another source, an Arabic source or something like that? Yeah. That's right, he's actually translating. I'm not right. In other words, he gives layers and layers and layers of it to make it. But that's the same thing we get in Lord of the Rings. It's like these strange layers that we get that are in Beowulf. And again, Beowulf, says things like, "And so I've been told, as I have heard." That keeps getting injected again and again throughout Beowulf. It's clearly not somebody from the time writing it. It's somebody who's looking back and trying to put it together. Right? Wow. We have the curse, like I said, we'll talk about it, but I mean, The Hobbit obviously was very, very influenced by the story of the dragon, right? Because if you remember, this is the whole ironic thing. The dragon was not hurting anybody until Bilbo went in and stole something, and then it destroyed everybody. And that's why, how can you have any sympathy whatsoever for Thorin Oakenshield, who refuses to share any of the treasure with the men of Dale, even though it's their fault that the dragon destroyed their whole village, right? Because they woke it up in that sense. I mean, it was, Anyway, all of that stuff is great. And then just, it was who?
It was all Gandalf.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about it. Gandalf. Look at number 11. Again, I think I said this before, but we need to understand that the reason why the Black Riders, the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, why they're so bad is not just their strength. They bring with them a numinous fear that terrifies people. You get a little bit when they do that screech and everybody covered. I mean, that's what it is. It unmans everybody, right? They hear it and they can't function because there's and remember, but before, if you know, we didn't get there yet, but before Sauron attacks Middle Earth, attacks Gondor, Middle Earth, what does he send? You know? This thing, the Black Breath. and he sends a sort of blackness over everything that's blocking the sun. Like he's preparing a sense of terror that will, unnerve people so they can't fight. And remember, when Beowulf fights Grendel, and especially Grendel's mother, again, he's not just facing the threat to his life. He's facing a fear, goose flesh, right? Again, I'll say this when we get there again, but I love the movie, but, when Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas go through the paths of the dead, their life is not in danger, right? Ghosts cannot kill you, okay? We need to understand that, okay? Ghosts cannot kill you. But they may drive you insane. It is the numinous fear, the uncanny. Freud used that word too. That's what makes them... And the same thing when he dives into the dark mirror, it might as well be Shelob's cave that they're going into. They're going into a place of absolute terror where the darkness is so dark it's like there's nothing. And have any of you ever gone through a cave where they shut off the lights? It's what they call total darkness.
I've done that.
Wow.
I was the cave guide.
Oh, you were a cave? I
did
didn't know.
that.
Oh, cool. Which cave?
Longhorn Cabin?
Oh, Longhorn. Yeah, okay. Oh, that's neat. Yeah. And what that means is when you go into a cave and they shut the lights, it is so dark you cannot see your hand in front of your face like that.
It's really cool though, because sometimes your brain will play a trick on you because it knows your hand is
Oh.
so you think you can see it because your brain knows your hand is
That's interesting, but it really
It
can't.
does not work for other people's hands though.
Oh,
So if
okay.
I put my hand in front of your face.
Right, you don't, you don't see it.
Your brain won't
Yeah, because it doesn't know that.
It's not your hand.
Oh, that's cool. And well, the guides at least said that if you stayed there for days and days, you could go crazy or you could even go blind. Or something like that.
Could be. You will hallucinate and you might go crazy. You'll
Yeah.
hallucinate, you'll think you see lights you're used to seeing.
Right.
So you'll hallucinate lights or a shape in the darkness because you want to see something.
It's terrifying. It's like living in the men's dorm here. It's just terrifying. Anyway, the what am I doing? Oh my gosh! Oh man, there's so much to cover. The dead marshes. When you were reading about Grendel's mother, wasn't it like the dead marshes? Deep down? By the way, did you notice that that Beowulf dives in and stays underwater for like 10 hours? He's got some kind of primitive scuba gear or something like that, Maybe that James Bond pen that he puts in his mouth in Thunderball, and he can breathe under the water. But again, it is still. I mean, Lord of the Rings is fantasy in that sense, right? Not just because there's fantastical animals there, but again, we do have to give our willing suspension of disbelief, Oh my gosh. Let me see. It's so late. We'll press on and we'll let you out a few minutes early. If you have to go to the bathroom, just run. But do I want to read this? Let's read this. Okay, it's on the end of your handout. I put it in there because, this is really good if you are a Christian and you have a friend who's like really fundamentalistic and they refuse to read any fantasy, Harry Potter's evil, all that sort of stuff. Okay, this is a good defense. Okay, you can give them written by J.R.R. Tolkien, right? And this is from On Fairy Stories now, which is really worth reading. It's like a long essay, almost a book-length essay. And he says, I once wrote to a man, and we know he was talking about C.S. Lewis, right? I once wrote to a man who described myth and fairy stories as lies. This is before Lewis became a believer. Though, to do him justice, he was kind enough and confused enough to call fairy story making breathing a lie through silver. Like, well, I'll be nice and tell you it's beautiful lies. And it's like, no, right? And then, this is a poem that Tolkien wrote, and actually, the full poem is longer than this. He's excerpting his own poem. It's called Mythopoeia, if you want to look it up, the whole poem. But this is the center, okay? And he says, Dear sir, I said, although now long estranged, man is not wholly lost, nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. Does anybody know what he's referring to here? We're disgraced because of what? Okay, sin, good. And we often call that what sin? We're all born with it. Original sin, okay? Or depravity. Right now, again, both Lewis and Tolkien were completely against total depravity, partly because they didn't really understand what the Calvinists meant by it, right? I mean, if it only means every part of us is subjected to the fall, that's okay. But a lot of people speak of total depravity as if we're just so worthless that our white is God's black and our black is God's white, and we have, we're saying no. We are still made in God's image, right? This is much more a Catholic understanding. And what he's saying is, look, we are estranged from God because of original sin, okay? We are estranged from God, and that's a Catholic phrase. The Calvinists are the ones that use total depravity. We are estranged, right? But we're not wholly lost or wholly changed. We still maintain the what? That God gave us. The image of God, Imago Dei in Latin. So we still maintain the image of God, but we are fallen, right? And we are cut off from God. But we are still made in God's image. We have not lost that. And some people speak as if we've lost it, when I read like Mark Twain, you listen to all the preachers in Mark Twain, you're wholly sinful. I mean, all of that stuff is true, but they do it to such an extent, it's like God looks at us and holds his nose in disgust. And I think they overdo it a little bit. You get that in Scarlet Letter as well. Okay, so no, we still keep the rags of lordship once healed. We are still the stewards of nature. We're still the lords. Lewis said, even now the animals are ready to fall at our feet and follow us, as they would have done in Eden. Right? It's kind of interesting the way he puts it, right? That's it? Not only, there are evil cats. Okay.
I was thinking about the ones that will eat you.
Like the wild ones, right? Then, and some of you have probably heard this word. I use it. Dr. Bolson uses it a lot. It's a great word that Christians use. Tolkien calls us sub-creators. Only God is the creator, because only God can create ex nihilo out of nothing. We can't do that. We can't create out of nothing. But we're sub-creators. We create under God. He sort of gives us the vision, and we take what has been given to us and put it together. Right? I don't know if Tolkien would have liked, quote, modern art, but I think he would have found it cool when Picasso and his heirs do what's called found art, where you find things in the ground, even in a garbage can, and you use it to do something. I think Tolkien would approve of that idea, even if he wouldn't like the final product. I think we take what is given. I remember one of them was it Seth who used wood that had washed up out of the ocean, like down in Galveston, which is kind of cool, right? Is any of your stuff found, or you just buy it all? It is, because it looks new. I haven't seen that. Do you use some stuff you found? I was thinking you've done that, yeah. And many of the artists have done that. It's really kind of cool, finding stuff, using something that you found. I mean, it makes sense, right? Just like I, as a writer, and I've talked to other writers that do that, it's like we want it to fit exactly on a page. And so we'll change everything to make it fit on a page. But somehow I think God uses that in creativity. In other words, limits can actually make us more creative and more imaginative. Right? The best example of that is a sonnet, which is an incredibly limited form. It should kill all creativity because it's so formalistic. But for most good poets, it releases their creativity, right? And any of the arts, right? So I just love this image. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues. So God's pure white light. Remember, it's really weird, but in one sense, all colors put together are white, which doesn't seem to make sense. But the pure white light, because that certainly doesn't happen if you take every crayon and put it together. So it's not going to work. Okay? But light itself, the pure white light refracts into all the different colors. Right? Did you have to do that silly lab experiment with the prism? Kind of cool. Oh no, you missed the lab. That's right. Yeah, you missed the lab, didn't you? Yeah, you'll do it. You'll do it in the fall. But it's kind of cool. So and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. So again, we are the prism through whom God, especially if we're being artistic, God's white light, the pure light, is refracting through us into all different colors and forms and shapes and things like that. Though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, remember goblins are orcs, though we dared to build gods and their houses out of dark and light, and sowed the seed of dragons, 'twas our right. God has made us to be makers. It is our right to create. Then in parentheses, used or misused. because we can misuse our creativity as well as we can use it, right? And we can twist. I mean, what book has been twisted more than any other book ever written? The Bible, okay? Almost everything, every kind of, cult and heresy has come out of a twisting of the Bible, okay? We can do whatever we want with it. So it can be misused, but it can also be used properly. Our right to be sub-creators, the right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we're made. We make because we're makers. Then he goes on to explain it. Fantasy is a natural human activity. It certainly does not destroy or even insult reason, and it does not either blunt the appetite for nor obscure the perception of scientific verity. On the contrary, the keener and the clearer is the reason, the better fantasy will it make. There are a lot of modernists who are not necessarily religious, but they hate fairy tales because it's irrational. No. The best fairy world is created by someone who is very rational and reasonable and knows form and line and color and everything like that. The better the reason, the more real your sub-world is going to be. Fantasy can be carried to excess, right? It can be ill done, it can be done poorly. It can be put to evil uses. It may even delude the minds out of which it came. Okay, he agrees that all of this is possible. But of what human thing in this fallen world is that not true? We can twist anything, including the Bible, right? Men have conceived not only of elves, but they have imagined gods, and they have worshipped them, even worshipped those most deformed by their author's own evil. But they have made false gods out of other materials, their notions, their banners, their monies, even their sciences, and their social and economic theories, kind of thinking of Marx there, have demanded human sacrifice. Abusus non tollit usum. And that means in Latin, abuse does not take away use. Just because something can be ill-used does not mean that thing in itself is bad, right? The same knife can be used to heal and to kill. Okay? The same fire can be used to heal or to kill, right? Fantasy remains a human right. We make in our measure and in our derivative mode because we are made. And not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. Okay? We're made in the image of a maker, and therefore it is natural for us to create. Now, not all of us may do music or art or a novel, but we all are creative in one way, right? We could be a good cook. I mean, that is a creativity. Right? That is taking different foods and putting together different spices and weird sort of stuff. By the way, I discovered something that I actually thought was good. You probably think this was sick. But, when I make popcorn, I like to spice it up. And so I'll put balsamic vinegar on, which is really good. And then there's almost no sugar or fat in balsamic vinegar. And then sometimes I'll sprinkle Italian spices on it. And it's really good. But the other day, I put the balsamic, and then I reached for my spices, and instead I put my cinnamon on top of it. And I said, well, I don't want to throw it away. Let's try it. And I actually thought it was good. You can decide whether you want to try balsamic vinegar and cinnamon. But of course I love cinnamon and everything. But it actually tasted pretty good. Is it sweet and sour maybe? I don't know. But that was kind of weird. So that was it. What is? The bitter and the aromatic sweet. Oh, so maybe. Okay, so maybe. But anyway, so I may have created something. I might be onto something by accident. Okay, now let's just end by. I just got to give you a passage or two in Lord of the Rings before we end, because this is, again, it's a very important passage for my son and I about the stories that really matter. So let's look at that. I'll give you the page number. It's here it is. It's page 711. Let's just end here and look at this passage, one of the best ever written. Okay, as they're walking along, page 711, about halfway down the page, they're making their way up the stairs of Cirith Ungol into Mordor, and Frodo says, I don't like anything here at all. Step or stone, breath or bone, earth, air, and water all seem accursed, but so our path is laid. Yes, says Sam, and we shouldn't be here at all if we'd known more about it before we started. Right? Now he's going to give one of this great meditation on the nature of story. He says, but I suppose it's often that way. the brave things in the old tales and songs, Mr. Frodo, adventures, as I used to call them. I used to think that they were things the wonderful folk of the ancient stories, went out and looked for, because they wanted them, because they were exciting and life was a bit dull, a kind of a sport, as you might say. I used to think that adventures were things that people just wanted. They were bored, they wanted a little fun, and so they went off on an adventure. This is before he knew that fairy are the perilous realms, okay? I just thought it was a distraction, right? He says, but that's not the way of it with the tales that really mattered, or the ones that stay in the mind. Folks seem to have just been landed in them, usually. Anybody feel that way about coming to Houston Baptist University? Maybe you were just landed in this story. Well, first of all, I'm in Houston, okay? I'm a little Yankee boy from New Jersey. What the heck am I doing here? I still don't know, but I love it, okay? Just sort of landed, right? Just sort of thrown in there. Their paths were laid that way, as you put it. But I expect they had lots of chances, like us, of turning back, only they didn't. And if they had, we shouldn't know, because they'd have been forgotten. In the movie, it becomes those folks kept going on because they were holding on to something. That there's some good in this world and it's worth fighting for, which is not a line in Tolkien, but I think it fits, okay, with Tolkien. But again, in real stories, people could have turned around and left, right? I could have said, Houston, God, I think I heard that wrong. Okay? But no, that's where I want you to go. I want you to leave the hills of Kentucky. Come here, okay? I want you to leave Iran, okay? That's even farther away, okay? You're on a mission. I've got something to teach you, whatever it is, right? He says, we hear about them. We hear about those as just went on. And not all to a good end, mind you, at least not to what folk inside a story and not outside it call a good end, right? It's fun for us to see the good ending at the end, right? Talk about the Bible. We see the good ending that the patriarchs didn't see. They yearned for that. And we get to, how many eyes yearned to see what you see and did not see it, Jesus says, right? They suffered so we could be where we are. I think of my grandparents, 4 grandparents from Greece with not even a high school education coming, right? And learning and working, right? Why? So that their grandson could teach Lord of the Rings someday. That's why, okay? Okay. He says, coming home and finding things all right, though not quite the same, like old Mr. Bilbo. But those aren't always the best tales to hear, though they may be the best tales to get landed in, right? We'd all like to be in the story where we have the happy ending, get to go back to the Shire and all that sort of stuff like Bilbo. But that may be the best story to be part of, but it's not the best story to read. Right? Then he says, I wonder what sort of a tale we've fallen into. Wow. Art commenting, almost postmodern. What kind of a tale have we fallen into? I wonder, said Frodo, but I don't know, and that's the way of a real tale. Take anyone that you're fond of. You may know or guess what kind of a tale it is, happy ending or sad ending. But the people in it don't know, and you don't want them to. Right? We're in the story, and we don't know the ending. No, sir. Beren now, and we all know about him, Beren now, he never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown of Morgoth in Fangorodrim, and yet he did. And that was a worse place and a blacker danger than ours. Yeah, Fangorodrim is even scarier than Mordor. Okay? But that's a long tale, of course. It goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. So the happiness is Beren and Luthien, but then eventually they died, so it went into grief, right? And the Silmaril went on and came to Eärendil. And why, sir, I never thought of that before. You've got some of the light of it in that star glass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end? We're part of the same story that began with Abraham. We're still part of it. Okay, it's still going on, right? And we can add to things. We're still part of those same people that fought at the Alamo and died, or the founding fathers, or the Puritan founding fathers, or beyond that, on and on. We're still part of that, okay? We have the 2 most ancient races here, Marzi and I, okay? Going way, way back to Greece and Persia, okay? These old, we don't have any Egyptians here, I don't think, or Babylonians. So anyway, so again, don't they ever end? He says, no, They never end as tales, but the people in them come and go when their part's ended. Our part will end later or sooner. This is what it means to live in what the theologians called an eschatological universe, a universe that has a beginning, a middle, and end, a universe that's going somewhere, that's moving towards a good ending, though we've got to be really patient. And then we have seen some rest and some sleep. He laughed grimly. And I mean just that, Mr. Frodo. I mean plain ordinary rest and sleep and waking up to a morning's work in the garden. I'm afraid that's all I'm hoping for all the time. All the big important plans are not for my sort. Still, I wonder if we shall ever be put into songs or tales. It's a great thing. We're in one, of course, but I mean, put into words, told by the fireside, or read out of a great big book with red and black letters years and years afterwards. And people will say, let's hear about Frodo and the ring. And they'll say, oh yes, that's one of my favorite stories. Frodo was very brave, wasn't he, Dad? Yes, my boy, the famousest of the hobbits. And that's saying a lot. It's saying a lot too much, said Frodo. And he laughed, a long, clear laugh from his heart. Such a sound had not been heard in those places since Sauron came to Middle-earth. To Sam, suddenly it seemed as if all the stones were listening and the tall rocks leaning over them. But Frodo did not heed them. He laughed again. Why, Sam, to hear you somehow makes me as merry as if the story was already written. But you've left out one of the chief characters. Samwise the Stout-Hearted. I want to hear more about Sam, Dad. Why didn't they put in more of his talk, Dad? That's what I like. It makes me laugh. And Frodo wouldn't have got far without Sam. Would he, Dad? Now, Mr. Frodo, you shouldn't make fun. I was serious. So was I. And so I am. We're going on a bit too fast. You and I, Sam, are still stuck in the worst places of the story. And it is all too likely that some will say at this point, shut the book now, Dad. We don't want to read anymore. Maybe. But I wouldn't be one to say that. Things done and over and made into part of the great tales are different. Why, even Gollum might be good in a tale, better than he is to have by you anyway. And he used to like tales himself once by his own account. I wonder if he thinks he's the hero or the villain. Again! Wow, and then they dropped that. They don't say anything about it again. But that's what we would call postmodern today. Okay? What does he think? I mean, again, this is a dissertation on stories. And yet, it doesn't read like a sermon thrown in. It's absolutely organic to the character of Sam and to the character of Frodo and to the conversations they have with each other. Right? But that's what it is. We're in a story. And, again, obviously I do apologetics a lot, and I'm always interviewed about that. And I said that the kind of apologetics that needs to be done now for millennials, whatever you want to call yourselves, right, is story-based apologetics. Because, they were saying, the people that are, 30 and under, a lot of them are not that interested in, quote, a logical argument. They want a story. They want to be part of a story. That's why we keep watching all the Marvel movies and all that sort of stuff. Even if they're good or bad, we still watch them because I think we all have a sense that we're in a story. And we want to be the hero rather than the villain, right? We want to be part of that story. We want to understand. So what kind of a story have we landed in? I wonder if the Jews asked that of themselves when they were wandering in the wilderness. Did they ask that? What kind of a story? This is good stuff, man. It's good stuff. All right. I'm going to let you go. Good job. Like I said, we still have a little bit to finish of book 4, and then we'll move into book 5. And I think we still have 3 weeks to finish, and then 4 weeks from now will be the final oral, right? Yeah, I think. We've got 4 weeks of classes left after this, before finals. So, and when your papers are due, I think you still have several weeks. Did you find it? When are your... April 28th, because that's what is today. So you still have...
When is the oral? May 5th?
Yeah, you still have a while. So, all right, good job, folks. Clinton, we missed you.